The desert is very quiet at night. The wind moves slowly over the sand, brushing the surface in soft, careful strokes. The air cools gently as the sun slips away, and the warmth of the day fades into something softer, something calmer. Above, the sky stretches wide and open. The stars appear one by one, steady and patient, just as they have for thousands of years. And beneath that quiet desert, beneath the stillness and the sand, there are places that have remained untouched for a very long time. Hidden spaces. Sealed rooms. Carefully built chambers where time once slowed, and then seemed to stop. These are the tombs of ancient Egypt. For a long time, they rested in silence. No footsteps. No voices. Only the quiet weight of stone, and the slow drifting of sand above them. But over the past 2 centuries, people have come looking for these places. Not in a hurried or noisy way, but with patience and care. They brush away the sand, grain by grain. They follow faint signs in the earth. They listen to the land. And slowly, gently, they begin to uncover what has been hidden. Inside these tombs, they do not just find objects. They find traces of lives once lived. They find stories, resting quietly in the dark. In ancient Egypt, death was not seen as an ending. It was something softer than that. Something quieter. A continuation. People believed that after death, a person would move into another kind of life. A life that looked, in many ways, like the one they had already known. There would still be food. Still be work. Still be rest. Still be familiar comforts. And so, when someone died, their tomb was prepared not as a place of loss, but as a kind of home. A place where they could continue on. Because of this belief, tombs were filled with many things. Simple things. Beautiful things. Everyday things. And each object was placed with care. When archaeologists first enter a tomb, the air inside often feels different. Still. Dry. Undisturbed. Sometimes, the air has not moved for thousands of years. The walls, if they are painted, hold their colors in a quiet, faded way. Reds and golds softened by time. Blues that have become pale and gentle. The floor may be covered in a thin layer of dust. And in the center, or along the walls, there are objects. Many objects. Some are large and easy to see. Others are small, almost hidden. Each one has been waiting, without change, in the same place where it was left long ago. One of the first things often found is the sarcophagus. It rests heavily, usually at the center of the burial chamber. Made of stone or wood, sometimes covered in detailed carvings, it holds the body of the person who was placed there. The lid is often shaped like a human form. Calm face. Closed eyes. Hands resting quietly. The expression is peaceful. Still. As if in sleep. Inside the sarcophagus, there may be another coffin, and sometimes another inside that. Layer upon layer. Each one protecting what lies within. And within those layers is the mummy. The process of mummification was careful and slow. It took many days. The body was treated with respect and attention, prepared so that it could remain intact for the journey into the next life. Organs were removed and placed in special containers. The body was dried using natural salts. Then it was wrapped, gently, in long strips of linen. Each layer added with care. Each fold placed by hand. When archaeologists find a mummy, they do not rush. They observe quietly. They study the wrappings. Sometimes, Small objects are tucked between the layers. Amulets. Tiny carvings. Protective symbols. Each one placed there to help guide and protect the person in the afterlife. Around the sarcophagus, many other items are often arranged. There may be wooden chairs, simple stools, low tables. These are not just decorations. They are objects meant to be used, because the person buried there was expected to need them again. Some chairs are plain. Others are beautifully carved, with curved legs and smooth surfaces. Even after thousands of years, the shape of them feels familiar, comfortable, balanced. There are also beds. Wooden frames, sometimes with woven surfaces. Headrests made of stone or wood. Not soft like modern pillows, but shaped to support the head in a gentle, steady way. These objects tell us something quiet and simple. That rest was important. That comfort mattered. Even in death. In many tombs, there are jars. Rows of them. Carefully sealed. Some contain food. Grains. Dried fruits. Bread that has hardened with time. Others hold oils or perfumes. Subtle scents that may still linger, faint and distant. These items were placed there so the person would not go hungry. So they would have what they needed, even after leaving the world of the living. There are also small statues. Many of them. These are known as servant figures. They stand quietly in rows, carved from wood or stone. Each one holds a tool. A hoe. A basket. A jar. These figures were meant to work in place of the person in the afterlife. If there was farming to be done, they would do it. If there was water to carry, they would carry it. It is a gentle idea. That work could be shared. That even in the next life, there would be help. The walls of the tombs often tell stories. Painted scenes stretch across the surfaces, showing moments from daily life. People walking, cooking, fishing, gathering crops, sitting together. These are not grand or dramatic scenes. They are quiet, ordinary. And that is what makes them feel so real. The brush strokes are simple. The colors soft. But the meaning is clear. Life continues. In one form or another. As archaeologists move through these spaces, they do so slowly. Carefully. Each step is measured. Each object is documented. Nothing is rushed. Because these places are delicate. Not just physically, but in a deeper way. They are filled with intention. With memory. With a quiet sense of presence. Sometimes, deeper within the tomb, there are smaller rooms. Hidden chambers. Storage spaces. In these areas, more objects are found. Boxes filled with clothing. Linen garments, folded long ago. Jewelry made of gold and stone. Necklaces with small beads. Bracelets shaped to fit the wrist. Each piece made with care. Each one meant to be worn again. Gold appears often. Not in a bright or shining way, but in a soft, warm glow. It does not fade. It does not rust. It remains steady. Because of this, it was seen as something eternal. Something lasting. And so, it was used for objects meant to endure. Masks. Amulets. Decorative details. All placed gently within the tomb. One of the most striking discoveries in some tombs is the funerary mask. Placed over the face of the mummy, it is shaped to resemble the person. Calm features. Symmetrical lines. eyes that seem closed, yet aware. These masks were not just decorative. They helped the spirit recognize the body. They gave form to identity. They preserved a sense of self. Time passes differently in these places. Years become centuries. Centuries become thousands of years. And still, the objects remain. Quiet. Unmoving. Waiting. When archaeologists finally step back out into the sunlight, there is often a moment of stillness. The brightness feels different after the dim interior of the tomb. The air feels warmer. Lighter. But something from the tomb stays with them. A sense of calm. A feeling of having stepped into another time. Another rhythm of life. And so, the work continues. Slowly. Gently. Carefully uncovering what was left behind. Not to disturb it, but to understand it. To listen. To learn. To sit quietly with the past. The desert remains. The wind continues to move across the... And beneath it all, there are still more places waiting. More stories resting in silence. More lives, carefully preserved. Not lost. Just, sleeping. The morning in the desert begins very softly. A pale light spreads across the horizon, slow and gentle, like a quiet breath. The cool air lingers for a little while longer before the warmth returns. Sand stretches in every direction, smooth and undisturbed, holding no sound except the faint whisper of the wind. Somewhere within this wide and quiet land, a tomb rests beneath the surface. It does not call attention to itself. It does not rise above the ground. It waits, hidden, just as it has for thousands of years. And when it is found, it is not opened quickly. The work begins slowly. Carefully. A single layer of sand is brushed away. Then another. Each movement is soft and controlled, as if the ground itself might be listening. The entrance, when it appears, is often simple. A cut in the rock. A doorway sealed long ago. Sometimes covered with stones, sometimes filled with sand that has settled and hardened over time. There is no rush to enter. There is a pause. A quiet moment where nothing moves. Then, gently, the opening is cleared. And the darkness inside becomes visible. It is not an empty darkness. It feels full, in a quiet way. Still air, undisturbed for centuries, rests inside the passage. When archaeologists step in, they move slowly, allowing their eyes to adjust. The temperature shifts. Outside, the desert warms with the rising sun. Inside, the air remains cool and steady. The walls feel close, made of stone that has held its place without change. Footsteps sound different here. Soft. Muted. Each step echoes just slightly, then fades. There is no wind. No movement. Only stillness. As they walk deeper, the passage may slope gently downward, leading toward the burial chamber. The walls sometimes hold faint markings. Lines carved into stone. Symbols painted with careful hands. These markings are not random. They carry meaning. They guide. They protect. They speak in a language that once felt as natural as breathing. Even now, though the language is ancient, the feeling remains. A sense that this place was made with intention. With care. With purpose. At the end of the passage, the space opens. The burial chamber reveals itself slowly, as light reaches into the room. And within that space, everything has been waiting. Nothing has shifted. Nothing has been touched. The objects sit exactly where they were placed. It is not a scene of chaos. It is a scene of order. Quiet order. Calm arrangement. The sarcophagus rests at the center, as it often does, holding its steady presence. Around it, objects form a kind of still life, frozen in time. A chair stands near the wall. A small table sits beside it. Jars are arranged in rows. Boxes are stacked, closed but intact. Each item feels settled, as if it belongs exactly where it is. There is no sense of abandonment. Instead, there is a feeling of continuation. As if the person who was placed here simply stepped away, and might return. On one side of the chamber, a collection of tools may be found. Simple tools. Wooden handles. Stone blades. Objects shaped for work. These tools tell a quiet story of daily life. Of tasks repeated over and over. Of hands that once held them with familiarity. Farming tools are common. Small hoes. Carrying baskets. These reflect a life connected to the land. To soil. To growth. To the steady rhythm of planting and harvesting. Even in death, these tools were considered important. Because the next life was expected to follow a similar rhythm. Nearby, there may be pottery. Smooth clay vessels, shaped by hand. Some are plain. Others carry simple patterns. Lines. Curves. Soft decorations. Inside them, traces sometimes remain. Grain dust. Fragments of dried food. Residue of oils. These small details carry a quiet weight. They remind us that the people buried here once ate meals. Prepared food. Sat down. Rested. Lived in a simple, steady way. And those small, everyday moments were important enough to be remembered, even here. In another part of the chamber, clothing may be found. Folded carefully. Layered with attention. The fabric, though fragile, often remains. Linen, woven with skill. Light. Breathable. Made for the warm climate. Some garments are simple. Others carry fine details. Pleats. Edges. Soft shaping. These clothes were not just for appearance. They were for comfort. For daily use. And so they were brought into the tomb, just as they would be brought into a home. Jewelry rests quietly nearby. Small beads strung together. Necklaces that once lay against the skin. Bracelets shaped to fit the wrist. Rings that once circled fingers. The materials vary. Stone. Faience. Gold. Each piece reflects both beauty and meaning. Some are decorative. Others are protective. Amulets are often found among these items. Tiny shapes. Symbols carved with care. Each one holding a purpose. A sign of protection. A quiet wish for safety. Placed close to the body, or among personal belongings, they were meant to guide and guard. The light inside the tomb moves slowly as archaeologists work. It does not flood the space. It reveals it, gently. A wall painting may begin to appear more clearly. Figures drawn in profile. Calm expressions. Bodies shaped in a stylized, balanced way. Scenes of daily life unfold across the surface. A man walking beside a field. A woman preparing food. A group of workers carrying baskets. There is no urgency in these scenes. No rush. Only steady movement. Repetition. Routine. Life as it was lived. The colors, though faded, still hold their presence. earth tones, soft reds, muted blues, warm yellows. They blend into the stone, becoming part of the space. These paintings were not meant to decorate alone. They were meant to exist, to continue, to provide. In a quiet way, they were part of the life that would carry on. As the hours pass, the work inside the tomb continues at a steady pace. There are pauses, moments where nothing is touched, where observation takes place, where silence fills the room again. These pauses are important. They allow the space to remain calm, undisturbed, respected. Sometimes, deeper sections of the tomb are revealed, hidden behind walls, covered by stone blocks, small chambers that hold additional objects. These areas often contain more personal items, things that were not meant to be seen immediately. Boxes are opened carefully. Inside, there may be small belongings, combs, mirrors made of polished metal, containers for oils or perfumes. Each object carries a quiet connection to daily routines, to simple habits, to the passing of time in a life once lived. The mirror, though no longer reflective, suggests moments of stillness. A person looking at their own face, adjusting their appearance, preparing for the day. The comb suggests care, attention to detail, a slow movement through the hair. These are not grand actions. They are small, but they are meaningful, and they were remembered. Even here, in the deeper silence of the tomb, as the day outside grows brighter, the tomb remains unchanged. Its cool air holds steady. Its stillness remains complete. Inside, time does not seem to move. There is no sense of morning or afternoon. Only a constant quiet, a steady presence. And within that presence, everything waits. Not forgotten, not lost, just resting. Just as it has been, for a very long time. The deeper parts of a tomb often feel even more still, as if the silence has settled there more completely. The air becomes slightly heavier, though it remains dry and calm. The light, when it reaches these spaces, moves slowly across the surfaces, revealing details that have not been seen for thousands of years. In these inner chambers, objects are often arranged with even greater care. Nothing feels random. Nothing feels misplaced. There is a quiet sense of order, as if everything was placed with a clear and thoughtful hand. Wooden chests are sometimes found here. Rectangular in shape, with flat lids, they rest against the walls or in small groupings. The wood, though aged, still holds its structure. When opened carefully, these chests reveal layers of belongings. Folded fabrics, small containers, personal items. Each one placed gently, as if the act of storing them was done slowly, without hurry. Some chests contain writing materials, reeds used for writing, small palettes that once held pigments, fragments of papyrus. Though time has worn them down, their presence remains meaningful. They suggest that the person buried here may have written, or at least valued written words, messages, records, thoughts. Even in a quiet life, writing held a place. Nearby, there may be small statues of deities. Carved with care, they stand in still positions. Calm expressions, balanced forms. They are not large. They do not dominate the space. Instead, they remain present in a quiet, steady way. These figures were meant to offer protection, guidance, a sense of connection to something beyond the visible world. They were not meant to create fear or awe. Only reassurance. A quiet presence in the stillness. In some tombs, small boats are found. Carefully crafted models, made of wood. They carry tiny figures. Rowers. Passengers. Sometimes a small cabin structure. These boats were not toys. They held meaning. They represented travel. Movement. The journey through the afterlife. The belief that water, like life, continues to flow. The details in these models are gentle and precise. Oars shaped evenly. Figures seated in calm positions. Nothing is exaggerated. Everything is balanced. It reflects a world where movement was steady and purposeful. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Just, continuous. Food offerings appear again in these deeper chambers. More jars. More containers. Sometimes sealed tightly. Other times partially open. Inside, traces of grain, dried meat, or bread may still be found. These remains are quiet reminders of nourishment. Of the need for sustenance. Of the simple act of eating. Even in the afterlife, this need was understood and respected. The idea of hunger was not ignored. It was gently prepared for. Water vessels are also present. Simple containers. Smooth surfaces. Shaped to hold and pour. Water, in the dry landscape of Egypt, was always important. Essential. Life-giving. And so, it was included here as well. Not in abundance. But in quiet, thoughtful amounts. Enough to provide. Enough to sustain. The walls in these deeper spaces are sometimes less decorated. Or decorated in a more subtle way. Symbols may appear. Repeated patterns. Simple markings that carry meaning beyond their form. They are not always easy to understand. But they are not meant to be loud or obvious. They exist quietly. As part of the space. As part of the structure itself. The floor may show signs of careful preparation. Flattened. Smoothed. Sometimes covered with a thin layer of fine material. Nothing is rough or careless. Even the ground beneath the objects was prepared with attention. This care suggests something gentle. A desire for order. For calm. For a space that feels complete. As archaeologists move through these rooms, they begin to notice patterns. Similar objects appear in different tombs. Similar arrangements. Similar choices. This repetition is not accidental. It reflects shared beliefs. Shared understandings. A common way of preparing for what comes after life. It is not dramatic. It is not complicated. It is simple. Steady. Consistent. And that consistency brings a quiet sense of comfort. A feeling that these people, though separated by time, shared something deeply human. A desire to continue. To remain. To carry forward the parts of life that mattered most. As the exploration continues, the work remains slow. There is no need to rush. The tomb has waited for thousands of years. It will not change in a single day. And so, each object is given time. Each space is observed. Each detail is noted. With patience. With care. With a quiet respect for what has been left behind. Outside, the desert continues its steady rhythm. The sun rises higher. The air warms. The wind moves across the sand in soft patterns. But inside the tomb, nothing shifts. Nothing changes. The silence remains. Deep. Unbroken. and within that silence, the past rests gently. Not distant. Not unreachable. Just, quiet. And still. As the work continues within the tomb, there is a growing familiarity with the space. The darkness no longer feels unknown. The cool air feels steady, almost comforting in its consistency. Each step becomes more careful, not out of uncertainty, but out of respect for what surrounds them. The walls, when observed closely, begin to reveal finer details. Lines that once seemed simple now show intention. A slight curve in a figure's arm. The careful placement of a foot. The repetition of symbols that carry quiet meaning. These details were not added quickly. They were created with patience. With steady hands. With an understanding that this space would last far beyond a single lifetime. In some areas, the paintings show scenes of offering. Tables filled with food. Loaves of bread stacked neatly. Fruits arranged in calm order. Jars placed side by side. Figures stand nearby, their posture relaxed, their movements gentle. There is no sense of urgency in these scenes. No rush to complete a task. Only the quiet act of giving. Of preparing. Of providing. These images were meant to ensure that such offerings would continue, even when no one was there to place them. It is a quiet idea. That an image, carefully made, could become a lasting presence. Nearby, inscriptions may appear alongside the images. Lines of symbols arranged in neat rows. Each one carved or painted with attention. They are not random marks. They are words. Messages. Names. Quiet expressions of identity. Some of these inscriptions speak of the person buried within the tomb. Their name is repeated, sometimes many times. Not loudly. Not for display. But gently. As if to ensure it is remembered. In ancient belief, a name held great importance. To speak a name was to keep it alive. And so, these inscriptions serve as a quiet continuation of that life. A soft echo that does not fade. In one corner of the chamber, a group of canopic jars may be found. They are placed together, often within a small chest or arranged carefully on the ground. Each jar holds a specific purpose. They contain the organs that were removed during the process of mummification. The jars are shaped in a simple, balanced form. Their lids are often carved to resemble heads. Calm faces. Still expressions. Each one representing protection. The presence of these jars adds another layer to the understanding of care. Nothing was left to chance. Every part of the body was considered. Every detail attended to. Even in separation, there was a sense of unity. A quiet completeness. The arrangement of objects within the tomb often follows a pattern. Larger items placed with space around them. Smaller items grouped together. Nothing feels crowded. Nothing feels empty. There is balance. A sense that the space was designed not just to hold objects, but to create a feeling. A calm, ordered environment. Almost like a room prepared for rest. As archaeologists continue to move through the tomb, they begin to notice the subtle layering of time. Some objects show slight signs of age. A surface that has become softer. Edges that are no longer sharp. But many things remain remarkably unchanged. The dryness of the air has preserved them. The sealed space has protected them. Time, in this place, has moved very slowly. Almost gently. In a small recessed area, more personal items may be discovered. These are often the most quiet, the most intimate. A small container that once held makeup. A stick used to apply it. A fragment of fabric, worn smooth with use. These items do not speak of ceremony. They speak of daily life. Of moments that passed quietly. A person sitting in stillness. Preparing for the day. Taking care of themselves. These small acts, repeated over and over, form the rhythm of a life. And here, in the tomb, they are remembered. Not in words, but in objects. In presence. In silence. In another part of the chamber, there may be evidence of writing that was done by hand. Marks that are less formal. Less structured. Perhaps notes. Perhaps simple records. They are not always easy to understand. But they carry a sense of immediacy. As if someone paused, long ago, and made a mark in that moment. A small trace of thought. Left behind without knowing it would remain. The ceiling of the tomb may also hold decoration. Simple patterns. Or perhaps a representation of the night sky. Small stars painted across a dark surface. Even here, beneath the ground, the presence of the sky was remembered. It was not forgotten. It was brought into the space. A quiet reminder of something vast and constant. Something that continued beyond the walls of the tomb. As the hours pass, the work continues in a steady rhythm. There is no sense of completion. No final moment. Only a gradual uncovering. A slow understanding. Each object adds a small piece to a larger picture. A picture that is not loud or dramatic. But calm. Balanced. Complete in its own quiet way. The archaeologists pause often. Not out of fatigue. But out of awareness. To allow the space to remain undisturbed. To listen, in a sense, to what the tomb holds. Because these places are not just collections of objects. They are environments. Carefully created. Carefully preserved. Holding within them a kind of stillness that is rare. A stillness that feels almost like sleep. Outside, the light begins to shift. The sun moves slowly across the sky. Shadows stretch across the sand. The warmth begins to soften again. But inside the tomb, nothing changes. The air remains cool. The silence remains deep. The objects remain still. And within that stillness, there is a quiet sense of continuity. A feeling that the past is not gone. Not distant. But simply resting. Waiting. Present in a calm and steady way. There are moments, deep within the exploration of a tomb, when everything feels especially quiet. Not just silent, but settled. As if the space itself has reached a kind of still balance that does not shift. In these moments, even the smallest details begin to stand out. A faint line carved into stone. A subtle change in color on a painted surface. A small object placed slightly apart from the others. Each detail carries meaning, though it does not demand attention. It simply exists, waiting to be noticed. In some tombs, there are low platforms built along the walls. These are not elaborate structures. They are simple, steady, and functional. Upon them, objects are arranged with care. Baskets woven from plant fibers. Their texture remains visible, each strand crossing another in a quiet pattern. Inside these baskets, there may be small items. Grains. Seeds. Fragments of dried plants. These are traces of agriculture. Of growth. Of cycles that repeat again and again. Planting. Harvesting. Storing. Preparing. These cycles form the foundation of daily life. And so, they were brought into the tomb. Not as decoration, but as continuation. The idea that life would still require these rhythms, still follow these patterns. Nearby, there may be tools related to crafting. Simple instruments used to shape materials, to cut, to smooth, to form. These tools reflect another aspect of life. The act of making, of creating, of shaping objects by hand. There is a quiet satisfaction in this kind of work. A steady focus, a calm repetition. And these tools, though still, seem to hold that memory. In one section of the tomb, a grouping of small figurines may appear more numerous than elsewhere. Dozens of them, arranged in rows. Each one similar, yet slightly different. Their forms are simple. Their expressions calm. They stand or kneel, holding tools or containers. These are the servant figures. Their presence is gentle, not overwhelming. They do not dominate the space. They blend into it. A quiet workforce, prepared to act when needed. The idea behind them is soft and reassuring. That tasks will be taken care of. That effort will not be burdensome. That there will be help. In another area, a larger statue may stand. Not of a servant, but of the person who was buried here. The figure is still, balanced, calm. The posture is upright, but relaxed. The face carries no strong emotion. Only a quiet sense of presence. These statues were meant to hold a part of the person's identity. To provide another place for the spirit to reside. If the body was damaged, the statue would remain. If time wore down one form, another would still exist. It is a gentle form of protection. A quiet assurance of continuity. The surface of these statues often shows careful workmanship. Smooth areas where the hand has passed many times. Details shaped slowly, with attention. Nothing rushed. Nothing careless. Even after long periods of time, that care remains visible. In some tombs, musical instruments are found. Simple ones. A small harp. A flute made from reed. These objects suggest moments of sound. Soft music played in quiet settings. Not loud or overwhelming. But steady. Calming. A background to daily life. The presence of these instruments reminds us that life was not only work. There was also rest. Also moments of still enjoyment. Moments where sound filled the space gently, then faded. These instruments now rest in silence. But their presence suggests a memory of sound that once was. A rhythm that once moved through the air. The placement of objects within the tomb continues to feel intentional. Nothing is scattered. Nothing feels abandoned. Each item holds its place. As if the room itself remembers where everything belongs. As archaeologists observe this, they begin to understand that these tombs were not simply storage spaces. They were environments designed to feel complete. Balanced. Prepared. Every object contributes to that feeling. Every detail adds to the quiet whole. In a smaller side chamber, more delicate items may be found. Things that were perhaps used less often. Or valued in a different way. Small containers with lids. Boxes with sliding tops. Inside them, fine materials. Beads. Pigments. Oils. The lids are often shaped to fit precisely. Closing with a gentle, secure motion. These objects speak of careful handling. Of attention. Of a slower pace of life. Where even small tasks were done with intention. The air in these deeper chambers remains unchanged. Dry. Still. Protective. It holds everything in a steady state, preserving not just the objects, but the feeling of the space itself. A feeling that is difficult to describe, but easy to sense. A quiet calm. A gentle stillness. As the day moves forward outside, the tomb remains separate from it. There is no sense of passing time here. No shifting light. No change in temperature. Only a constant environment. A steady presence. This separation from time is part of what makes these discoveries feel so unique. The objects are not just old. They are preserved in a way that allows them to remain close to what they once were. Not altered by seasons. Not worn down by weather. Simply held in place. Waiting. As the work continues, the archaeologists maintain their careful pace. There is no need to hurry. No need to disturb the quiet. Each step is taken with awareness. Each movement made with care. Because within these tombs, everything feels connected. Every object. Every surface. Every space. Part of a larger, quieter story. One that does not speak loudly, but remains present, steady, and calm. And as long as the tomb remains, that story continues to rest within it. Unchanged. Unbroken. Still. In the deeper hours of exploration, the tomb begins to feel familiar in a quiet and steady way. The path through its chambers is no longer uncertain. Each turn, each doorway, each narrow passage becomes part of a calm and repeated movement. The archaeologists move slowly, not just because they must, but because the space itself seems to invite slowness. The air remains unchanged. Cool. Still. Dry. It carries no scent of the outside world. No trace of wind or water. Only the faint presence of stone, dust, and time resting together. In one of the chambers, attention turns again to the walls. At first glance, they appear simple. Flat surfaces, lightly marked. But with time, more details begin to emerge. Layers of paint, applied carefully, one over another. Fine lines drawn with precision. Shapes that repeat in quiet patterns, forming a kind of rhythm across the surface. Some scenes show the movement of workers in fields. Figures bending gently. Hands reaching toward the earth. Carrying bundles. Placing them down. There is no strain in their posture. No sense of urgency. Only the steady repetition of a task that is known and understood. In these scenes, the land itself is present. Simple lines suggest water. Soft curves indicate growth. The idea of the Nile, though not always directly shown, feels close. A quiet presence, always flowing somewhere beyond the walls. Nearby, another scene shows preparation of food. Grain being ground. Bread being shaped. Jars being filled. The actions are small. Careful. Repeated many times. These were daily tasks. Simple routines. But they formed the foundation of life. And so, they were remembered here. Not as grand events, but as quiet necessities. In the corner of the room, a low wooden stool may be found. Its surface smooth from use. Its legs sturdy, though worn slightly with time. It is not decorated. Not elaborate. It is simply made. A place to sit. A place to rest. Its presence suggests moments of stillness. A person pausing during the day. Sitting quietly. Perhaps after work. Perhaps before beginning again. These small pauses were part of life. And here, even they are included. Beside the stool, a small woven mat may lie flat against the ground. Its fibers are tightly bound. Its edges slightly uneven. It was once placed with care. Perhaps used for sitting, or resting, or even sleeping. The mat carries a quiet softness, even now. A sense of comfort that remains, though no one has touched it for a very long time. Further along, a grouping of containers appears. Each one slightly different in shape. Some tall and narrow. Others short and wide. They are arranged in a way that feels balanced. Not perfectly aligned, but not scattered. Their surfaces are smooth, shaped by careful hands. Inside, there may still be traces of what they once held. Fine powder, grain, oil residue. These contents have changed with time, but their presence remains. A quiet indication of what was once stored. Of what was once needed. In another chamber, the ceiling dips slightly lower. The space feels more enclosed. More intimate. Here, the decoration is softer. Less detailed. But still intentional. Small markings repeat along the surface. A pattern that continues from one side to the other. It does not draw attention. It does not stand out. But it adds to the feeling of completeness. A sense that every part of the tomb was considered. Even the spaces that are not immediately seen. As archaeologists move through this chamber, their footsteps become even softer. The closeness of the walls changes the sound. Each movement feels contained. Held within the space. There is no echo here. Only a gentle presence of sound that fades quickly. In a recessed niche, a small lamp may be found. Simple in form. Made of clay. Its surface slightly darkened, perhaps from use. This object suggests something quiet and human. Light. A small flame held carefully in the darkness. A person moving slowly through a space like this, guided by a soft glow. It is a calm image. A gentle presence of light within shadow. Though the lamp no longer burns, its purpose remains clear. A reminder that even in these enclosed spaces, light once moved. Softly. Carefully. As the exploration continues, more small details begin to gather into a larger understanding. Each object, each marking, each arrangement contributes to a sense of life that was steady and continuous. There is no single moment that defines it. No loud event. Only a series of quiet actions, repeated over time. Waking. Working. Resting. Eating. Preparing. These actions form a rhythm. And that rhythm is what fills the tomb. Not in sound, but in presence. In memory. In stillness. The archaeologists begin to move with this rhythm. Their pace slows even further. Their movements become more deliberate. There is a quiet alignment between the present and the past. A shared sense of calm. Of careful attention. Outside, the day continues. The sun rises higher. The desert warms. The wind shifts slightly, moving grains of sand across the surface. But inside, none of this is felt. The tomb remains unchanged. A place outside of movement. Outside of time. And within it, everything continues to rest. Not forgotten. Not lost. Simply waiting. In a quiet, steady way. There comes a point in the exploration when the tomb begins to feel less like a hidden place and more like a quiet dwelling. Not in the sense of activity, but in its arrangement. Its balance. Its calm presence. Each chamber feels like a room prepared with care. A space that once held meaning in every detail. The transition from one room to another is gentle. A doorway carved into stone. A short passage. Then another space opens, slightly different, yet connected. In one such chamber, attention is drawn to a long wooden bed. It stands slightly raised from the ground. Its legs carved in simple shapes. Its surface flat and steady. The wood has aged, but it remains intact. This bed is not elaborate. It does not carry heavy decoration. But its presence is strong. It represents rest. A place where the body would lie still. Where sleep would come slowly. Where the day would come to an end. Nearby, a headrest may be found. Carved from stone or wood. Curved gently to support the head. It is firm, yet shaped with care. It reflects a different kind of comfort. A simple, practical support. One that was used regularly. And so, it was included here. A continuation of familiar rest. At the foot of the bed, a small chest may sit. Inside, folded fabrics. Linen, arranged in layers. The folds remain visible. Each one placed carefully. This suggests preparation. A sense that these items would be needed again. That rest would not be complete without them. Along one wall, a set of walking sticks may lean quietly. Each one slightly different in shape. Some straight. Some gently curved. Their surfaces smooth, shaped by repeated use. These sticks suggest movement. Steps taken over time. Journeys, both short and long. They carry the memory of walking. Of steady progress. And in the stillness of the tomb, they remain as quiet reminders of motion that once was. In another corner, a low table holds a small arrangement of items. A bowl. A cup. A simple plate. They are placed close together, as if prepared for use. There is no sign of disorder. No sign of abandonment. Only a quiet readiness. As if the moment of use has simply been paused. On the wall behind this table, a painting shows a similar scene. A person seated. Food placed before them. Hands reaching gently. The connection between image and object is subtle. But it is present. A quiet reflection. A continuation from one form to another. As archaeologists observe these details, they begin to feel a sense of repetition. Not in a tiring way, but in a calming one. The same objects appear again and again, in different tombs. The same arrangements. The same care. This repetition suggests something steady. A shared understanding of what was important. Of what was needed. Of what would continue. In a smaller adjoining space, there may be items related to personal care. Small jars. Thin sticks used for applying substances. Fragments of polished surfaces. These objects suggest routines that were quiet and private. Moments taken alone. Care given to the body. Not as decoration alone, but as maintenance. As attention. These routines, though small, were part of daily life. And so, they were included here as well. The air in this chamber feels especially still. As if it has settled more deeply. The walls seem to hold the silence more closely. Sound fades quickly. Movement feels softer. Contained. The archaeologists move carefully, aware of how easily the stillness can be disturbed. Their presence is gentle. Their actions measured. They do not rush. They do not speak loudly. They allow the space to remain as it is. Because in this quiet, there is something that feels complete. A sense that nothing is missing. Nothing is out of place. Everything that needed to be here, is here. Even the absence of movement feels intentional. A continuation of rest. A continuation of stillness. As the light from their tools shifts across the room, shadows move slowly along the walls. They stretch. They soften. They fade. Then return again as the angle changes. This slow movement of light is the only sign of change within the tomb. Everything else remains steady. Unmoving. Outside, the day begins to lean toward afternoon. The heat becomes stronger. The light brighter. But inside, the tomb holds its own environment. Unchanged. Quiet. Cool. The separation between inside and outside becomes more noticeable. Almost like two different worlds. One in motion. One at rest. And within the resting world, the past remains. Not distant. Not unreachable. Just, still. Waiting in a calm and steady way. Holding its place without effort. Without sound. Without change. And as long as the tomb remains undisturbed, that stillness continues. Unbroken. Soft. Enduring. As the quiet work continues, there is a gentle sense that the tomb is revealing itself in layers. Not all at once. Not quickly. But slowly, as if each detail prefers to be noticed in its own time. The archaeologists begin to spend longer moments in stillness. Standing. Observing. Allowing their eyes to adjust not just to the dim light, but to the subtle presence of everything around them. In one chamber, the floor itself begins to draw attention. At first, it appears as simple packed earth. Flat. Even. But closer observation reveals faint impressions. Soft markings that suggest where objects once rested. Slight depressions where weight remained for long periods. These marks are not sharp. They are gentle. Almost faded. But they carry a quiet memory of placement. Of arrangement. Of time spent in stillness. In some areas, the floor holds traces of fine sand that has settled over the years. It gathers lightly in corners. Along edges. In small, quiet drifts. This sand is different from the shifting dunes outside. It does not move. It does not scatter. It rests. Held in place by the stillness of the tomb. Nearby, a series of low wooden boxes may be found. Their lids closed. Their surfaces smooth. They are not decorated in elaborate ways. But they are carefully made. Each edge aligned. Each corner fitted with quiet precision. When opened gently, they may reveal small collections of objects. Beads arranged in strands. Pieces of jewelry placed side by side. Amulets, each one shaped with intention. These items carry a different kind of presence. They are not tools. They are not daily necessities. They are personal. Decorative. Symbolic. Each piece was likely chosen with care. Worn close to the body. Part of identity. Part of expression. Even now, resting within these boxes, they retain a quiet sense of importance. The materials vary. Some beads are made of stone. Others of glass-like substances, smooth and slightly reflective. Their colors, though softened by time, still hold traces of brightness. Soft blues. Muted greens. Warm earth tones. These colors do not stand out sharply in the dim light. They blend gently into the surroundings, adding subtle variation. a quiet richness. In another part of the chamber, a group of folded linens may be discovered. Stacked carefully, layer upon layer. The fabric is light, almost weightless. Yet it has remained intact, protected by the dry air. Each fold suggests intention. A careful hand placing it down, smoothing it gently, preparing it for use. These linens may have served many purposes: clothing, covering, wrapping. They represent comfort, warmth, softness against the skin. And here, they remain untouched, waiting in silence. Along one wall, a painted scene shows a quiet moment of daily life. A person seated near a doorway, another standing nearby. Between them, a simple exchange. An object passed from one hand to another. The scene is calm, unhurried. It captures a small interaction. Something that may have happened many times. Something ordinary. Yet it was chosen to be remembered. To be placed here, within the tomb. This suggests that even the smallest moments were valued. Not just grand events, but simple exchanges. Quiet connections between people. As archaeologists continue to observe, they begin to notice how often these quiet moments appear. In paintings, in objects, in arrangements. Life, as it is shown here, is not dramatic. It is steady, gentle, filled with small actions that repeat over time. In a narrow passage leading away from the main chamber, the walls become more plain, less decorated. The space feels transitional. A place between rooms, between functions. The ceiling lowers slightly, encouraging slower movement. Careful steps. The air here feels the same, yet the closeness of the walls creates a deeper sense of stillness. At the end of this passage, a smaller room opens. It is simpler than the others. Fewer objects. More open space. But even here, there is intention. A single chair may stand against one wall. Its form simple. Its surface smooth. It is not placed randomly. It holds its position with quiet certainty, as if it belongs exactly where it is. Beside it, a small container rests on the floor. Closed. Undisturbed. These minimal arrangements create a different kind of atmosphere. One that feels even more quiet, more focused. A space where less is present, but nothing feels missing. The archaeologists pause here longer than expected. There is something about the simplicity that invites stillness. A sense that this room does not need to be filled. It already holds what it needs. The absence of many objects becomes its own kind of presence. Soft. Open. Calm. As they return to the larger chambers, the contrast is gentle. Not striking, but noticeable. Each space within the tomb carries its own character, its own rhythm. Yet all are connected by a shared sense of balance. A shared stillness. The deeper the exploration goes, the more this feeling grows. That the tomb is not just a collection of rooms, but a carefully composed environment. Each part contributing to a whole. A whole that was designed to remain, to endure, to hold its form across time. Outside, the light begins to soften once more. The sun slowly lowers. The heat of the day begins to ease. But inside, nothing changes. The tomb continues in its quiet state. Unaffected. Unmoved. And within it, every object, every surface, every small detail remains as it has been. Still. balanced, at rest. As the exploration reaches deeper into the tomb's inner chambers, the sense of quiet becomes even more profound. It is no longer just an absence of sound. It feels like a presence of calm. A stillness that settles gently over everything. In these deeper rooms, the walls often carry fewer decorations. Or the decorations are softer. More faded. The colors less pronounced. Time has touched these surfaces lightly, but enough to soften their edges. Yet even in this softness, the intention remains clear. Shapes can still be seen. Lines still follow their paths. The meaning, though quieter, has not disappeared. In one chamber, a long, narrow shelf is carved directly into the wall. It runs horizontally, just above the height of the waist. Upon it, small objects are placed in a careful line. Each space slightly apart. Each given its own space. There is no crowding. No overlap. These objects may include small figurines, simple tools, or symbolic items. Their arrangement suggests thought. Not random placement. But a quiet decision about where each one should rest. This sense of order appears again and again. It is one of the most consistent features within the tomb. Nothing feels accidental. Everything feels considered. On the ground below the shelf, the surface remains smooth. Undisturbed. There are no signs of hurried movement. No marks of chaos. Only the gentle signs of time passing slowly. In another part of the room, a tall storage jar stands alone. Its height reaching nearly to the waist. Its body wide and rounded. Its surface plain, yet carefully shaped. The jar is sealed. Its contents unknown at first glance. But its presence is steady. A quiet container of something once important. Perhaps grain. Perhaps oil. Perhaps water. Whatever it once held, it was preserved with care. Even now, the seal remains intact. A silent guardian of what lies within. Nearby, a small group of stones may be arranged in a circle. At first, their purpose is not immediately clear. They are simple, uncarved, natural in form. Yet their placement feels intentional. They are not scattered. They are gathered, forming a shape that suggests meaning, though it remains quiet and subtle. In the dim light, their shadows fall gently across the ground. Soft shapes that shift slightly as the light moves. In one corner, a fragment of wall decoration has partially worn away. The image is incomplete. Lines fade into the surface. Colors dissolve into the stone. But even in this partial state, there is something calming about it. A reminder that time does not erase everything. It softens. It reduces. But it also preserves, in its own way. Leaving behind traces. Hints. Quiet impressions. As archaeologists continue their careful work, they begin to notice how their own movements have slowed. Not by instruction, but naturally. The environment encourages it. The stillness shapes their pace. Each step becomes softer. Each gesture more deliberate. There is a quiet respect that grows, not from obligation, but from feeling. From being present within a space that has remained untouched for so long. In a small alcove, partially hidden from view, a single object may rest. A carved figure. Smaller than others. Less detailed. But still shaped with care. Its surface is smooth. Its form simple. It does not stand out immediately. It requires attention to be seen. And once seen, it holds a quiet presence. As if it has been waiting patiently. not to be discovered, but simply to exist. This is a common feeling within these tombs. That the objects are not seeking attention. They are not meant to impress. They are meant to remain. To be part of a space that is calm and complete. The archaeologists take time here. Not measuring. Not recording. Just observing. Allowing the space to be as it is. Because sometimes, understanding does not come from action, but from stillness. From allowing the environment to be experienced without interruption. Outside, the sky begins to shift toward evening. The light softens further. Colors in the desert begin to fade into gentle tones. But none of this reaches inside. The tomb remains constant. A place untouched by the passing of the day. A place where time does not move in the same way. And within this stillness, everything continues to rest. Quietly. Patiently. Exactly as it has for a very long time. There is no urgency here. No need for change. Only the steady presence of what has been left behind. And the gentle awareness of those who have come to see it. Who move softly. Who observe quietly. And who, in their own way, become part of this calm and unbroken moment. As the slow winds drifted across the Nile, carrying with them grains of golden sand, life in ancient Egypt continued in a rhythm that had remained unchanged for generations. The great river, ever dependable, still rose and fell with quiet certainty, nourishing the land and the people who depended on it. Farmers worked silently in the early hours of the morning, their feet pressing gently into the soft, damp soil left behind by the receding flood waters. They moved with patience, not haste, planting seeds that would take months to grow, trusting in the natural cycle that had never failed them. In the distance, the faint outline of temple walls shimmered in the rising heat. These temples, built with enormous care and devotion, were not just places of worship, but centers of daily life. Priests walked slowly through shaded corridors, their white linen garments flowing softly as they carried offerings of bread, fruit, and incense. Inside these sacred spaces, time seemed to move differently. The flicker of oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows on walls covered in carvings, images of gods, kings, and stories that stretched far back into memory. Each symbol, each line, had been carefully carved to ensure that the stories would live on, even when the voices that spoke them were long gone. And beyond the temples, beyond the fertile fields, the desert remained vast, quiet, and unchanged. It was here, at the edge of the known world, that Egypt's greatest mysteries continued to rest. The pyramids stood as they always had, their massive forms rising from the sand with an almost unnatural stillness. Time seemed unable to touch them. Winds came and went, empires rose and fell, yet the pyramids endured. Workers and caretakers still visited these ancient monuments, not to build, but to maintain, to honor, and to remember. They swept away drifting, checked passageways, and ensured that the resting places of the pharaohs remained undisturbed. There was a deep respect for the past, a belief that those who came before were never truly gone. As evening approached, the sky softened into hues of amber and violet. The heat of the day slowly faded, replaced by a gentle coolness that invited rest. Families gathered outside their homes, sharing simple meals, speaking in low voices, or sometimes not speaking at all. Children listened to stories passed down from their elders, stories of gods who shaped the world, of kings who commanded the land, and of journeys into the afterlife. These stories were not told with excitement or urgency. They were told slowly, almost like a lullaby. Because in ancient Egypt, history was not just something to be remembered. It was something to be felt. The night deepened, and the stars began to appear bright and steady in the vast darkness above. The same stars that had guided travelers, inspired myths, and watched over countless generations. And beneath them, Egypt rested. Not in silence, but in a kind of peaceful continuity. A civilization that did not rush forward, but flowed gently, like the Nile itself. And as sleep slowly came to the land, the ancient world seemed to whisper its stories into the quiet night, soft, endless, and unbroken. As the night settled more deeply over the land, the gentle sounds of ancient Egypt became even softer, almost fading into silence. The steady rhythm of the Nile could still be heard in the distance, its moving quietly through the darkness, as it had done for thousands of years. Small oil lamps flickered inside mud brick homes, their dim glow casting warm light on walls painted in simple patterns. Families slowly prepared for rest, laying down woven mats and soft linen cloths. The air, now cooler, carried a calmness that wrapped itself around everything. In the villages, the final voices of the day grew quieter. A mother softly hummed as she placed her child to sleep, her voice low and steady, blending with the stillness of the night. Nearby, an elder gazed up at the stars, tracing familiar patterns in the sky, patterns that had guided both farmers and priests alike. Above, the heavens stretched endlessly. The ancient Egyptians believed that the stars were more than distant lights. They were part of a greater story, a reflection of the divine order that governed both the sky and the earth. Each movement, each cycle, held meaning. And so, even in sleep, there was a quiet awareness of this connection. Far from the villages, deeper into the desert, the pyramids stood under the moonlight. Their silhouettes were softened by the pale glow, their sharp edges blurred into gentle lines. The sand around them shimmered faintly, as if the desert itself was breathing. Nothing moved here. And yet, it did not feel empty. There was a presence, something calm and enduring. The resting place of kings, guarded not by soldiers, but by time itself. Inside the pyramids, hidden corridors and sealed chambers remained untouched. The air within was still, unchanged for centuries. Carefully placed objects, jewelry, tools, offerings rested exactly where they had been left, waiting for a journey beyond this world. The ancient Egyptians did not fear death in the way many others might. To them, it was a continuation, a passage. And so, everything was prepared with care. Back along the Nile, a lone boat drifted slowly with the current. Its sail, barely moving, caught just enough of the night breeze to guide it forward. The water reflected the stars above, creating the illusion of a second sky beneath the boat. The world felt balanced. Above and below. Past and present. Life and afterlife. As the hours passed, the land remained still, yet never lifeless. Even in rest, there was movement, subtle, continuous, like a quiet that never truly stopped. And as the first hint of dawn began to approach, barely visible at the horizon, the cycle prepared to begin again. Not with noise. Not with urgency. But with the same gentle certainty that had defined ancient Egypt for ages. A civilization not driven by haste, but by harmony. And in that harmony, there was a kind of peace that seemed to stretch beyond time itself. As the first light of dawn slowly returned, it did so without sound, without rush, without disturbance. It arrived gently, spreading across the edge of the horizon like a soft unfolding of pale gold. The desert, which had rested in darkness, began to reveal its shape again. Dunes that had seemed to disappear in the night now reappeared, their curves smooth and quiet. Rocks that had blended into shadow now held faint outlines, touched by early light. Everything felt familiar again, as if the world was simply remembering itself. Along the Nile, the water caught the sunrise in thin reflections, broken into soft ripples that moved without urgency. Birds began to appear, not in great numbers at first, but in small, scattered groups. Their calls were gentle, spaced out, almost like they were testing the morning before fully entering it. In the villages, life slowly returned. Not suddenly, but in stages. A door opening. A fire being gently stirred. A pot of water set above warm coals. These small actions marked the beginning of another day, the continuation of a cycle that had no clear beginning or end. And somewhere, far from these homes, the silent desert still held its secrets beneath the sand. Inside the buried tombs, nothing had changed. The chambers remained sealed in their quiet state. The objects inside continued to rest exactly where they had been placed long ago. The air, untouched by time, remained still and dry, preserving everything in a gentle suspension. It was as if the world above and the world below were moving at different speeds. One flowing forward, the other remaining still. When archaeologists returned to these sites, they often spoke in quiet voices, not out of rule, but out of instinct. There is something about these places that naturally lowers the tone of human presence. Each movement becomes more deliberate. Each step more thoughtful. Not because of fear, but because of awareness. Awareness that they are entering a space that has remained undisturbed for centuries. A space that does not belong to the present moment. Inside one of these tombs, a narrow corridor leads to another chamber that feels slightly different from the rest. The air is the same, dry, still, but the arrangement of objects suggests a more personal touch. Here, items are grouped not only by function, but perhaps by memory. A small carved figurine placed beside a folded cloth. A simple bowl resting near a wooden object shaped by hand. Nothing is grand or overwhelming. Everything is modest. Intimate. Even the walls here feel closer, as if the space itself has gently narrowed to hold only what is necessary. In one corner, faint markings can still be seen. Not bold paintings, but soft impressions of lines and symbols that have faded over time. They do not demand attention. Instead, they appear slowly, almost shyly, as the light shifts across the surface. It takes time to notice them. And even more time to understand them. But their presence adds another layer to the feeling of the tomb. A sense that communication once existed here, not loud, not urgent, but steady and thoughtful. Outside the tomb, the desert wind moves again. It brushes across the sand in long, unbroken paths, reshaping the surface in ways that are almost unnoticeable unless watched closely. The landscape changes slowly. So slowly that it feels unchanging. And yet, it is always becoming something slightly different. Inside, however, nothing shifts. The stillness remains complete. Objects continue to rest where they were placed. Shadows remain soft and fixed. The sense of time is suspended, as if it has stepped aside and allowed silence to take its place. And in that silence, there is a feeling that is difficult to describe. Not emptiness. Not presence. But something in between. A quiet continuation of life, held gently within stone and sand. As the day outside grows warmer, the contrast becomes even more noticeable. The world above is in motion, subtle, constant, alive. But beneath the surface, everything is held in a calm pause that does not seem to weaken or fade. It simply remains. Steady. Uninterrupted. And so the story of these tombs continues in two worlds at once. One world of movement and light. And another of stillness and memory. Both existing side by side, without conflict, without noise. Only quiet balance. Only time, flowing in different ways. As the day outside continues to unfold, the light becomes stronger, more present, filling the desert with a warm and steady glow. The heat rises slowly from the sand, creating a soft shimmer that distorts the distant horizon. But beneath the surface, within the hidden chambers of the tombs, nothing responds to this change. There is no warmth. No shifting brightness. Only the same quiet stillness that has remained for centuries. Inside one chamber, archaeologists pause near a wall that appears at first to be simple and unmarked. But as they adjust their position, as the angle of light changes slightly, faint details begin to appear. Lines that were invisible moments ago now reveal themselves. Soft carvings. Gentle symbols. Not bold or deeply cut, but shallow and careful, as if the stone was touched rather than carved. These markings do not tell a loud story. They suggest one. A story that must be followed slowly, like walking along a narrow path where every step matters. Nearby, a cluster of objects rests near the base of the wall. A small ceramic vessel. A broken piece of wooden frame. A piece of linen, folded but worn at the edges. None of these items stand out on their own. But together, they create a sense of daily life that once passed through this space. Not in grand moments, but in quiet repetition. The kind of life built from simple routines. Waking. Working. Eating. Resting. And then beginning again. Deeper within the chamber, a faint draft of air occasionally shifts through unseen cracks in the stone. It is barely noticeable, but it reminds those inside that the tomb is part of a larger structure, one that extends beyond what can be seen. Even so, the air inside remains remarkably unchanged. It carries no scent of the outside world. No dust from the desert wind. Only the pure stillness of sealed space. In another section, a group of objects appears arranged in a way that feels almost ceremonial, though not dramatic. Small items placed in a careful arc along the floor. A stone amulet. A carved bead. A fragment of polished metal that no longer reflects clearly, but still holds shape. Their arrangement suggests intention, though the meaning is not immediately clear. And perhaps it was never meant to be understood quickly. Some things, within these tombs, seem designed for slow discovery. For gradual understanding. As if the space itself encourages patience. The archaeologists move carefully, their attention shifting between objects and surroundings. There is a natural rhythm that develops in such places. A balance between observation and silence. Between action and stillness. In a narrow side passage, the walls become rougher, less decorated. The stone here feels more natural, less refined. Yet even in the simplicity, there is structure. The passage leads downward slightly, creating a gentle slope. Each step feels a little deeper into quietness. At the end of this passage, another small chamber opens. It is less populated with objects. More open. More empty. But not in a sense of absence. Rather, in a sense of space. A single object rests near the center. A simple wooden box. Closed. Aged, but intact. Its surface is plain, marked only by time. There is something calm about its presence. It does not demand attention. It simply exists. Waiting. The surrounding space feels shaped around it, as if everything else has stepped back to allow it to remain undisturbed. No one rushes to open it. There is a pause. A moment of still observation. Because within these tombs, even the smallest action carries weight. Even the simplest movement is approached with care. Outside this hidden chamber, the desert continues its slow transformation under the sun. Shadows shorten. Heat rises. The sky remains clear and wide, stretching endlessly in all directions. But none of this reaches the chamber below. Time, as it exists above ground, does not fully enter here. It only passes nearby, leaving the interior untouched, unchanged. And in that separation, there is a strange kind of peace. A division between motion and stillness. Between the world that moves forward and the world that remains gently paused. The archaeologists, standing in this space, become part of that balance. Their presence does not disturb the quiet, it blends into it. Every sound feels softened. Every movement measured. Even thought itself seems to slow slightly, shaped by the atmosphere of the tomb. And so the exploration continues, not as a search for something hidden, but as a careful unfolding of something already present. Layer by layer. Moment by moment. In a space where time does not disappear, but simply rests. Deeper within the tomb, the silence feels less like emptiness and more like a settled presence, as if the stone itself has learned to rest. The air remains unchanged, but the sense of depth grows stronger with each chamber. Every passage feels slightly more enclosed than the last, as though the structure is gently folding inward, protecting what lies at its core. Light becomes more limited here. It does not spread freely. It arrives in narrow bands, carried by lamps or brief openings from the entrance far behind. And when it touches the surfaces, it reveals things slowly. A painted line here. A carved edge there. A shadow that turns out to be the outline of something placed long ago and never moved again. In one of these inner chambers, archaeologists come across a grouping of objects that feels especially quiet in its arrangement. Not because it is empty, but because everything is placed with such care that nothing feels unnecessary. A small wooden figure stands near a sealed jar. A folded piece of linen rests beside it. A shallow bowl sits slightly apart, as if given its own space to remain undisturbed. There is a sense here of deliberate order. A calm organization that does not feel forced, but natural. As if everything belongs exactly where it is. Along the wall, faint paintings still remain visible, though softened by time. Figures in profile move across the surface in gentle repetition. Their steps are not hurried. Their gestures are not dramatic. They appear to be engaged in simple acts, carrying, offering, standing, resting. Each scene flows into the next without clear separation, as if life itself was understood as a continuous rhythm rather than a series of moments. In some areas, the paint has faded almost completely, leaving only the faintest trace of what once was there. Yet even in this fading, there is something peaceful. A quiet reminder that time does not erase everything at once. It softens. It blends. It turns sharp detail into suggestion. Further into the chamber, the floor becomes slightly uneven. Not broken, but shaped by the natural structure of the rock beneath. In one shallow depression, several objects rest together, almost forming a small cluster. A stone amulet shaped in a simple form. A bead carved with a faint pattern. A fragment of something once larger, now reduced by time. These items are small, but their placement suggests they were not discarded. They were left. Intentionally. And in that distinction, there is meaning. Nearby, a narrow shelf carved into the wall holds a few additional objects. They are spaced evenly, each one occupying its own small section of stone. There is no overlap. No crowding. Just separation and balance. The effect is subtle but noticeable. A sense of calm structure that extends across the room. As the archaeologists continue their careful movement, they begin to notice how the chamber seems to respond to silence. Not in any physical way, but in atmosphere. When movement slows, the space feels more present. When sound decreases, the stillness feels deeper. It is as if the tomb has its own rhythm, one that aligns naturally with quiet observation. In a recessed corner, partially hidden from the main view, a small statue rests. It is not large. It does not stand prominently. It is placed in a way that suggests privacy rather than display. The figure is simple in form, with softened details. Its posture is steady. Its expression calm. It does not appear to be part of a scene. It exists alone. And somehow, that solitude feels intentional. As if it was meant to remain in that exact quiet place for a very long time. The surrounding stone has taken on a slightly different tone here. Not darker, but more enclosed. The air feels the same, yet the perception of space changes with every step. Time seems even more distant in this corner of the tomb. Less like something that passed. More like something that paused. Outside, far above, the desert continues its slow and steady cycle. The sun moves gradually across the sky. Light shifts across dunes that have been shaped and reshaped countless times. But none of that movement reaches this depth. Here, everything remains in a state of preserved stillness. Not frozen. Not inactive. Just quietly held. As the archaeologists stand for a moment without speaking, there is a shared understanding that nothing in this place is meant to be rushed. Every object, every mark, every empty space between them carries weight in its own way. And the more time they spend here, the more that weight becomes less about importance. And more about presence. A sense that everything has already been said by the arrangement itself. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be changed. Only observed. Only allowed to remain. And so the chamber continues in its quiet balance, holding its objects, its shadows, and its silence in the same steady way it always has. Unbroken. Unchanged. Resting gently beneath layers of time. The deeper the exploration goes, the more the tomb begins to feel like a world that has turned inward upon itself, folding silence into silence. There are no sharp transitions here. Only gradual changes. One chamber flows into another, and each space carries the same quiet tone, though with slight differences in shape, in arrangement, in feeling. In one section, the walls are almost bare. Not completely empty, but close enough that the absence of decoration becomes its own kind of presence. The stone is visible in its natural form, smoothed only where time and careful preparation once touched it. Even without images or carvings, the room does not feel unfinished. It feels complete in its simplicity. A kind of quiet completion that does not require ornament. On the floor, a few objects remain scattered in a loose formation, though scattered does not quite capture the feeling. They are separated, but not lost. A small clay vessel lies on its side. A fragment of wood rests nearby. A thin strip of linen, almost blending into the dust, lies stretched along the ground. Each item feels like a soft echo of daily life, preserved without interruption. There is no sense that they were abandoned in disorder. Instead, it feels as if they were placed and then simply left to remain in place, unchanged by anything that followed. In another part of the chamber, a low alcove opens in the wall. Inside it, objects are arranged in a way that suggests quiet intention. A pair of small containers sit side by side. A carved bead rests just in front of them. Behind, slightly elevated, a small figurine faces outward toward the room. The arrangement is subtle, almost like a silent composition rather than a display. Nothing draws attention loudly. Everything blends gently into the surrounding stillness. As archaeologists observe this, there is often a natural slowing of movement. Not enforced, but instinctive. The space encourages it. Each step becomes lighter. Each pause becomes longer. In these conditions, even the act of looking feels different. Less like searching. More like listening. Further along, a narrow passage leads to a chamber that feels slightly cooler than the others. The difference is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. But once noticed, it becomes part of the experience of the room. The air here carries the same dryness, the same stillness, but there is a sensation of depth, as if the space extends further into the earth than expected. Along one wall, faint impressions remain where objects once stood. The outlines are barely visible now. Soft shapes pressed into dust and stone over time. These impressions suggest presence without requiring the objects themselves to remain. A reminder of something once placed carefully, then left undisturbed for centuries. In the center of this chamber, a group of objects is arranged in a circular pattern. Not a perfect circle, but close enough that the intention can be felt. A stone amulet. A small piece of carved wood. A fragment of pottery. A bead that has lost some of its color but not its shape. Together, they form a quiet arrangement that feels almost symbolic, though its meaning is not immediately clear. And perhaps it was never meant to be obvious. Some arrangements speak more in feeling than in definition. Around this space, the walls carry only the faintest traces of markings. Lines that may once have been clearer. Symbols that have softened into near invisibility. Yet even in their faded state, they contribute to the atmosphere of the chamber. A sense that communication once existed here, not as something loud or permanent, but as something gentle and layered. Something that time has not erased, only softened. As the archaeologists continue to move through the chamber, there is a growing awareness of how the silence itself seems structured. It is not random silence. It is layered. Deepened by space, by material, by time. Every object, every empty area, every faint mark contributes to it. Outside, the world continues its motion without pause. The sun shifts again. The desert changes in ways that are almost invisible moment to moment. But inside, there is no equivalent movement. No acceleration. No decay in the immediate sense. Only the continued presence of everything as it was left. Still. Balanced. Preserved in quiet continuity. And as this realization settles in, the tomb feels less like a discovery site and more like a long-held memory. One that has been waiting not to be uncovered quickly, but to be understood slowly. In silence. In patience. In time that does not rush forward, but gently unfolds. As the passage continues deeper, the structure of the tomb begins to feel even more intentional, as if every corridor was shaped not only to lead forward, but also to slow the movement of anyone who entered. The walls narrow slightly in places, then open again, then narrow once more. It is not abrupt. It is gradual. A quiet rhythm built into stone. Each step forward feels like entering a more concentrated silence. The air remains dry and unchanged, but the sense of enclosure grows stronger, as if the earth itself is gently wrapping around the space. In one of the deeper chambers, the lighting becomes more dependent on careful, controlled sources. Shadows soften and stretch along the walls, shifting slowly with each movement. Here, the objects are fewer, but they feel more deliberate. A single wooden chest sits against the wall, its surface worn but still intact. The grain of the wood is visible, softened by time and dryness. It has not been opened for a very long time. Nearby, a small collection of items rests directly on the ground. A bowl. A carved piece of stone. A folded cloth that has kept its shape despite the passing centuries. Nothing here feels accidental. Even the spacing between objects feels thoughtful, as if silence itself required balance. Along the wall, faint traces of painted decoration remain, though much of it has faded into the stone. What is left appears almost like memory rather than image. Soft outlines of figures that no longer fully exist, but are still recognizable in suggestion. A gesture of an arm. A curve of movement. A hint of presence. It is enough to understand that something was once there. And that is all it needs to be. In a recessed area of the chamber, archaeologists find a grouping of small objects placed together with quiet precision. Several beads. A small amulet. A fragment of a carved figure broken long ago, but still carefully kept. These objects are not arranged for display. They are arranged for continuity. As if their position matters more than their appearance. The space around them is undisturbed. No signs of disturbance or rearrangement over time. Just stillness preserved in its original state. Further inside, a low platform carved from the rock itself becomes visible along one side of the chamber. On it, a few items are placed in a line. Simple containers. A small tool made of stone or metal. A piece of linen folded into a compact shape. The platform is not large, but its presence adds structure to the room. It defines space without dividing it. It gives the chamber a quiet sense of order. As the archaeologists observe this area, there is a noticeable shift in how they move. Even without speaking, there is an understanding that this part of the tomb feels different. Not because it is more valuable, but because it feels more concentrated. As if the meaning of the space has been gathered into fewer things, leaving behind only what is essential. In a corner slightly removed from the main area, a narrow recess holds a single object. A small statue. Its form is simple, but complete. The surface is smooth in some places, slightly worn in others. Time has softened its edges, but not removed its presence. It sits quietly, not elevated, not emphasized. Just placed. And in that placement, there is a sense of calm permanence. It does not need to be explained. It only needs to remain. The surrounding stone feels slightly darker here, not due to light, but due to depth. The chamber seems to hold sound differently as well. Every movement feels absorbed rather than reflected. Silence becomes heavier, but not uncomfortable. It becomes steady. As if the space itself has settled into a deeper layer of rest. Outside, beyond layers of stone and sand, the desert continues its slow transformation under the passing sun. Shadows shift across ancient ground, and wind gently reshapes the surface in patterns that disappear almost as soon as they form. But none of that movement reaches here. Here, everything remains as it was left. Undisturbed. Unrevised. Unchanged. The archaeologists pause again, allowing the space to remain uninterrupted for a moment longer. There is no urgency in their actions. Only careful attention. A recognition that these chambers are not simply places to be explored, but spaces that continue to hold their own quiet existence. And as they stand in that stillness, there is a shared understanding that what they are seeing is not just the past. It is something that has continued to exist in its own quiet form. Not forgotten. Not erased. Just waiting. In a calm and enduring silence that time has never fully broken. Deeper still, the tomb seems to lose any remaining sense of direction that the outside world might expect. The passageways no longer feel like paths leading somewhere. They feel more like transitions between layers of quiet, each one slightly deeper than the last. The stone here is older in feeling, though not in age. It carries a different kind of presence, as if fewer hands have ever touched this part of the structure. The air remains unchanged, but the perception of it shifts. It feels closer. Not heavy, but more contained, as though the space is holding its breath. In one chamber, the floor is almost completely clear. No large objects. No crowded arrangements. Just open space, carefully maintained. But even this emptiness is not absence. It feels intentional. A kind of cleared stillness, as if the room was prepared to remain open rather than filled. Along one side, a low ledge carved into the wall holds a few carefully spaced items. A single bowl. A small carved figure. A fragment of something no longer complete. Each object is separated just enough to give it its own quiet space. Nothing touches. Nothing overlaps. Everything rests in its own small area of silence. On the opposite wall, faint carvings appear again, though they are more worn than in previous chambers. The lines are shallow, softened by time and dryness. Still, they suggest figures. Still, they suggest motion. But it is motion that feels frozen in memory rather than action. A hand raised. A figure standing. A gesture that no longer continues, but also does not disappear. It simply remains, held in stone. In a corner of the chamber, archaeologists find a grouping of small objects that appear to have been placed with careful symmetry. Two small containers facing each other. Between them, a bead or stone charm. Behind them, a slightly larger object, positioned as if watching over the arrangement. There is no obvious function to the setup. No practical use. Only placement. Only presence. It feels like a quiet balance created for reasons that are not immediately visible, but still deeply felt. Further along, a narrow opening leads into a smaller space. This room feels more enclosed than the others. The ceiling is slightly lower, and the walls draw closer together, not in a way that restricts movement, but in a way that encourages stillness. Inside, there is very little. A single wooden object rests against the wall. Its shape is simple. Its purpose unclear. But it has remained here without disturbance for an extremely long time. Next to it, a small piece of linen lies folded, though the folds have softened over time. The fabric is fragile, yet still recognizable as something once used in daily life. These items do not seem placed for display or ceremony. They feel more personal. More private. As if this chamber held things that were meant to be near, but not necessarily seen often. The silence in this room is noticeably deeper. Not louder. Not heavier. Just more complete. Even movement feels reduced here, as if the space encourages minimal action. Archaeologists remain longer in such areas without fully realizing it. There is no specific reason. Only the atmosphere that gently slows everything down. In this stillness, even thought seems to settle. Outside, the world continues its endless cycle of change. The sun moves lower, light shifts across the desert, and distant winds reshape the surface of sand that will never hold the same pattern twice. But here, beneath layers of earth and stone, none of that reaches. Time does not flow in the same visible way. It exists differently. Quietly. Evenly. Without interruption. Every object remains where it was placed. Every surface holds its position. Every shadow stays soft and still. And in this deep part of the tomb, there is a feeling that nothing has been disturbed, not because it is hidden, but because it has been allowed to remain. To continue existing in its own form of stillness. A stillness that does not ask to be changed. Only observed. Only gently understood. And so the chamber continues, unchanged and patient, holding its quiet arrangement of stone, wood, and memory in a way that feels almost timeless. At this depth, the tomb no longer feels like a sequence of rooms connected by passageways. It feels more like a layered quiet, where each chamber holds a slightly different shade of the same stillness. The air remains unchanged, yet the sense of distance from the outside world becomes more complete. It is not only physical distance now, but something softer, harder to define. A separation of atmosphere, as if the world above has become very far away. In one chamber, the light reveals a surface that has been untouched for a very long time. A wall that carries almost no decoration. Only faint traces remain. Lines that once formed images, now reduced to suggestions. It takes time for the eye to adjust here. Not because of darkness alone, but because of how little there is to immediately interpret. And yet, the space does not feel empty. It feels complete in its simplicity. On the floor, a few objects are placed in a loose grouping. A shallow dish. A small stone fragment. A piece of wood that has lost its original shape. They are separated by small distances, as if each one was given its own quiet place to remain. There is no sense that they were discarded. Only that they were left. And that difference is subtle, but important. Along the far wall, a narrow indentation holds a single row of items. They are spaced evenly, almost rhythmically. A bead. A small figurine. A tiny container. Each one occupies its own position, creating a quiet line that runs across the stone. It is not decorative in an obvious sense. It feels more like a memory of order. A gentle structure preserved in physical form. In the center of the chamber, the floor is smooth and slightly worn in places, as if something once rested there for a long time. There is no object now. Only the impression of presence. A soft reminder of something that was once central to the space. And now remains only in outline. The walls here carry faint discoloration, subtle shifts in tone that suggest layers of time rather than deliberate design. Light moves across them slowly, revealing and concealing details in a quiet rhythm. Nothing remains fixed in full clarity. Everything appears partially revealed. As if the room itself prefers suggestion over definition. In a recessed corner, archaeologists notice a small arrangement of items that feels slightly different from the rest of the chamber. A simple container sits at the back. In front of it, two smaller objects are placed side by side. And just ahead of them, a single item rests alone, slightly separated from the group. This spacing creates a gentle sense of structure, though its meaning is not immediately clear. It does not feel random. But it also does not demand interpretation. It simply exists as it is. Nearby, a faint marking on the wall becomes visible only when light passes across it at a certain angle. It is not a large carving. Not a bold inscription. Just a subtle line, perhaps part of something larger that has faded over time. It appears briefly, then recedes again into the stone. Like a thought that surfaces and then quietly dissolves. As archaeologists move through this chamber, their presence feels almost synchronized with the space. Their movements are slow without intention. Their attention lingers without effort. There is a natural alignment between observer and environment here, as if the room encourages a particular kind of awareness. Not focused on discovery alone, but on presence itself. Outside, the desert continues its quiet existence. The sun lowers slightly, casting longer shadows across the sand. The light softens, becoming less direct, more diffuse. The world above remains active in its own slow rhythm. But none of that reaches below. Here, everything remains in its preserved condition. Unaffected, uninterrupted, unchanged. And within this chamber, there is a feeling that time is not absent. It is simply held in place. Not stopped. Not erased. But gently contained within stone, wood, and silence. A silence that does not feel empty, but continuous. As if it has always been here. And will remain, just as it is, without needing to become anything else. In the deepest parts of the tomb, the sense of direction becomes less clear, not because the structure is confusing, but because everything begins to feel similar in its stillness. Each chamber carries the same quiet air. The same slow presence of stone. The same softened silence that seems to settle into every surface. And yet, no two spaces feel exactly identical. There are small differences in arrangement. Subtle shifts in how objects rest. Gentle variations in emptiness and fullness. In one chamber, the walls are almost entirely bare again. Not by accident, but by design or time. The stone here is exposed more fully than in other areas, showing its natural texture. Uneven in places. Smooth in others. It carries a kind of honesty, as if it is no longer trying to hide beneath decoration. On the floor, a few objects are placed far apart from one another. A clay vessel rests near one corner. A small carved figure sits closer to the center. A fragment of linen lies nearer the wall, lightly folded even after all this time. Each item feels isolated, yet not disconnected. There is a quiet relationship between them, formed not by proximity, but by shared stillness. Along one side of the chamber, a low shelf carved into the stone holds a carefully spaced row of items. The spacing is deliberate. Equal distances between each object. A small bowl. A bead. A miniature container. The arrangement creates a soft visual rhythm, almost like a line of pauses across the wall. Nothing interrupts it. Nothing breaks it. It simply continues, steady and unchanging. In the dim light, shadows fall gently beneath each object, giving them a subtle sense of grounding. Even stillness here seems to have weight. In another section of the room, a faint carving appears, barely visible unless the light shifts just right. It shows figures, though their outlines are softened and incomplete. They are no longer fully defined, yet their presence is still readable. A posture. A gesture. A moment frozen into the stone. It does not demand understanding. It simply offers itself as a trace of something once known. Nearby, a small recessed space in the wall contains a grouping of objects arranged in a quiet cluster. A container at the back. Two smaller items placed in front of it. And one object slightly offset, creating a gentle asymmetry that still feels balanced. The arrangement is subtle, almost hesitant in appearance, yet clearly intentional. It suggests care, but not display. Presence, but not performance. As archaeologists observe this area, there is a noticeable deepening of quiet. Not in sound, but in perception. The longer they remain, the more the space seems to define their pace. Movements slow without instruction. Attention lingers longer on each detail. Even breathing feels more conscious, more measured. It is as if the tomb encourages a certain way of being within it. One that does not rush toward conclusion, but remains within observation. In a narrow continuation of the passage, the walls draw slightly closer again. The ceiling lowers by a small margin, enough to change the feeling of the space. It becomes more enclosed, but not restrictive. More intimate in atmosphere. Here, very few objects are present. Only a single carved item rests on a ledge along the wall. Its shape is simple. Its surface worn gently smooth in places. It does not stand out as important at first glance. But its placement suggests it has always belonged exactly here. Not moved. Not adjusted. Just remaining. The silence in this section feels especially complete. Not heavy. Not empty. But full in a quiet way. A fullness created not by objects, but by the absence of disturbance. Outside, far above, the desert continues its slow rhythm. Light changes gradually across the surface of the sand. Winds shift patterns that will not last long enough to be remembered. The sky moves through its cycle of brightness and fading. But none of this reaches the chambers below. Here, the world does not respond to time in the same visible way. It holds instead. It preserves. It remains. And as the archaeologists stand in this deeper space, there is a shared understanding that what surrounds them is not simply ancient material. It is a form of continuity. A place where time has not disappeared, but has become quiet, held gently within stone and silence, and allowed to stay exactly as it is. At this depth, the tomb no longer feels like something being explored. It feels more like something being slowly remembered. Each chamber holds its own quiet atmosphere, yet all of them share the same steady stillness that seems to extend through the stone itself. The passageways between rooms are short now, but they feel longer than they are. Not because of distance, but because of the silence that fills them. A silence that is not empty. A silence that feels full, settled, and continuous. In one of the deeper chambers, the light falls in a narrow way, revealing only parts of the space at a time. The rest remains softly hidden. Not concealed. Just unlit. On the ground, a few objects are arranged without symmetry, yet still in a way that feels balanced. A shallow bowl rests slightly off-center. A small carved object lies nearby. A fragment of material, possibly linen or plant fiber, sits closer to the wall. Each item is separated just enough to avoid contact, as if space itself was part of the arrangement. There is no sense of disorder. Only a quiet spacing that feels intentional in its calmness. Along one side of the chamber, a carved recess in the stone holds a few carefully placed items. A small container at the back. In front of it, two objects placed side by side. And slightly forward, a single item resting alone. The arrangement does not form a pattern in the strict sense, but it carries a gentle structure that is easy to feel rather than define. It does not ask to be interpreted quickly. It simply exists in its arrangement. The walls here are less decorated than in earlier chambers. Where images once may have been, only faint traces remain. Soft lines that fade in and out depending on how the light touches them. They appear almost like impressions rather than carvings. As if the stone remembers more than it clearly shows. In one area, a faint grouping of marks suggests figures in motion. But the motion is no longer active. It has settled into stillness. A gesture remains. A posture remains. But the continuity of movement has long since softened into memory. Near the center of the chamber, the floor shows a subtle variation in tone. A slightly smoother area suggests something once rested there for a long time. Not necessarily heavy. Not necessarily large. But present enough to leave a lasting impression. Now, only the space remains. The absence itself becoming part of the room's structure. In a corner slightly set back from view, archaeologists notice a quiet arrangement of small objects that feel especially understated. A single container placed at the rear. Two small items positioned in front of it. And one object placed slightly apart, not isolated, but given its own space. There is a gentle sense of order here, but it does not feel strict or formal. It feels natural. Almost like the arrangement happens slowly over time rather than all at once. The silence in this chamber is particularly deep. Not because it is louder or heavier than elsewhere, but because it feels uninterrupted. Unbroken by change. Even movement within it seems to settle quickly, as if the space absorbs it gently. Archaeologists often pause longer in rooms like this. Not because there is more to find in the obvious sense, but because the atmosphere encourages still observation. A kind of quiet attention that does not need direction. Outside, beyond the layers of earth and stone, the desert continues its steady existence. Light shifts across sand dunes that have been reshaped countless times by wind. The horizon remains wide and unchanging in its vastness. But none of this movement reaches below. Here, everything remains held in its preserved state. Objects do not shift. Dust does not scatter. Time does not feel like something passing. It feels like something resting. And in that resting, there is a continuity that is difficult to describe. Not frozen. Not paused. But gently sustained. As if the entire space has agreed, without words, to remain exactly as it is. And so the chamber continues in its quiet balance. Holding stone, air, and memory together in a stillness that does not fade. Only deepens. At this stage of the tomb, the sense of depth is no longer only physical. It feels layered in a different way, as if each chamber sits not just behind the next, but also beneath a quieter version of time itself. The movement from one space to another is gentle and unhurried. Even the act of entering a new room feels like stepping into a slightly different kind of silence. Not louder. Not quieter. Just, different in texture. In one chamber, the stone walls appear more uniform than before. Less variation. Less decoration. A smoother surface that reflects very little light, absorbing it instead. This creates a soft, muted atmosphere where shapes are defined more by shadow than by color or detail. On the floor, a few objects are placed in a loose, almost organic arrangement. A small vessel lies slightly tilted. A carved fragment rests nearby. A thin strip of material, barely distinguishable from the dust around it, lies stretched in a gentle curve. There is no strict alignment between them. But they do not feel separate in meaning. They feel like they belong to the same quiet moment in time. Along one wall, a shallow recess holds a carefully spaced grouping of items. A container placed at the back. Two smaller objects arranged in front. And one item slightly offset, not centered, but still part of the composition. The spacing between them feels intentional, though not rigid. It creates a soft visual rhythm that draws attention without demanding it. In this chamber, the absence of decoration is more noticeable than decoration itself would be. Where earlier spaces carried faint traces of imagery or symbols, here there is mostly stone. Stone that has been shaped, smoothed, and left to remain. It feels complete in its simplicity. Not lacking. Just reduced to essentials. In the center of the room, the floor shows subtle variations in tone. Slight differences in color suggest where objects once rested for long periods. Not marks of damage. Not signs of disturbance. But impressions left by time and presence. These impressions are faint, almost like memory pressed into the ground. They are not meant to be noticed immediately. But once seen, they quietly change the way the space is understood. In a corner slightly away from the main chamber, a small grouping of objects rests together in a quiet arrangement. A container at the back. 2 items placed side by side in front of it. And a single object set slightly apart, as if given its own quiet boundary. There is no clear symbolic explanation that presents itself immediately. And yet, the arrangement does not feel random. It feels composed in a way that belongs entirely to this space. In another part of the chamber, faint traces on the wall suggest that something once existed here in a more visible form. Lines that are now softened beyond clarity. Shapes that appear only when the light moves across them at a certain angle. They do not hold firm detail anymore. But they still hold presence. A presence that is quiet and incomplete, yet not erased. As archaeologists continue their careful observation, there is an increasing sense that the chamber does not encourage haste in any form. Even thought itself seems to slow slightly in response to the environment. There is no pressure to interpret everything immediately. Only a gradual awareness that each detail reveals itself in its own time. Outside this buried world, the desert continues its slow and endless cycle. Wind moves across sand in patterns that appear and disappear without memory. The sun shifts across the sky in its steady arc, changing the quality of light hour by hour. But none of that motion reaches here. Beneath the surface, the tomb remains in its own condition. Unmoved. Unchanged. Held within a stillness that does not weaken with time. And in this stillness, everything that was placed here continues to remain exactly as it was left. Not active. Not forgotten. Simply present. Existing in a quiet state that feels neither beginning nor end. Only continuation. A gentle persistence of stone, shadow, and silence. As the exploration continues deeper, the tomb feels less like a place with boundaries and more like a continuous field of stillness, divided only by subtle changes in space. Each chamber is connected not just by passageways, but by a shared quiet that seems to move with the archaeologists as they proceed. There is no abrupt shift from one area to another. Only a gradual transition. A slow unfolding. In one of the inner chambers, the walls appear more uniform than before. The surface is smoother, with fewer marks of decoration or carving. It is as if this part of the tomb was meant to remain simple, or as if time has gently softened whatever detail once existed here. The lighting in this space is subdued. It does not spread evenly. Instead, it falls in soft, uneven layers across the stone, revealing parts of the room while leaving others in gentle shadow. On the floor, a few objects rest in a quiet arrangement that feels neither scattered nor formally organized. A shallow ceramic bowl lies slightly off to one side. A small carved object sits nearby, its shape worn but still recognizable as something made by hand. A fragment of material, perhaps linen or plant fiber, rests closer to the wall, its edges softened by time. These objects do not form a pattern in any strict sense. But they share a presence. A sense of belonging to the same quiet moment. Along the far wall, a recessed ledge holds a sparse grouping of items. A container placed toward the back. Two smaller objects in front of it, and one item slightly separated, not centered, but still part of the arrangement. The spacing between them feels calm and deliberate, though not rigid or formal. It creates a gentle rhythm across the stone surface, like a visual pause repeated 3 times. In this chamber, the absence of decoration is more noticeable than any detail could be. The stone itself becomes the primary presence. Its texture, its color, its quiet variations. There is a sense that nothing here is unfinished, only reduced to what is necessary. In the middle of the room, faint impressions can be seen on the floor where objects once rested for long periods. These are not sharp marks. They are subtle changes in tone and texture, shaped slowly over time. They suggest presence without requiring the objects themselves to remain. A kind of memory held in the ground. Nearby, in a slightly recessed corner, a small grouping of objects is arranged with quiet care. A container at the back. 2 items placed evenly in front of it. And a single object set just a little apart, given its own small space within the group. The arrangement is simple, but it carries a feeling of balance that is easy to sense but difficult to define. It does not demand interpretation. It simply exists in its placement. Along one section of the wall, faint traces of markings appear only when the light shifts at a certain angle. They are almost invisible at first glance. Soft lines. Faded impressions. Hints of something once clearer. They do not form complete images anymore, but they still suggest form and intention. A gesture. A figure. A moment once recorded and now softened into near absence. As the archaeologists continue their careful movement through the chamber, the atmosphere seems to guide their pace. There is no urgency here. No sense of needing to move quickly or complete anything in haste. Everything encourages still observation. A slower awareness. A quiet attention to detail that does not rush toward conclusion. Outside, the desert continues its endless and gentle transformation. Wind reshapes the surface of sand without memory of its previous form. Light changes across the horizon, marking time in slow gradients rather than sudden shifts. But none of that movement enters the tomb. Below the surface, everything remains in a preserved state of stillness. Unchanged. Undisturbed. Held in a condition that feels neither beginning nor end. Only continuation. And within that continuation, every object, every surface, and every faint trace of human presence remains exactly where it was left. Not active. Not absent. But quietly enduring in a space where time no longer moves in a familiar way. Deeper inside the tomb, the feeling of time becomes even more uncertain, as if the usual rhythm of hours and days has slowly dissolved into something softer and more continuous. There is no clear sense of beginning or end between chambers now. Only transitions that feel almost invisible, like passing through layers of quiet without noticing the exact moment of change. The stone here feels slightly different again. Not in composition, but in presence. It carries a more settled stillness, as if it has not been disturbed in a very long time, even by the faintest movement of air or light. In one chamber, the walls are mostly plain. There are only faint traces where decoration might once have existed. Soft shadows of lines that have faded so completely they now appear more like memory than carving. The surface of the stone is smooth in some places, rough in others, shaped by time rather than by design alone. On the ground, a few objects rest in a quiet formation. A shallow vessel placed slightly away from the center. A small carved item positioned nearby. A fragment of material, folded once, now softened into stillness. They are not arranged in a strict pattern. but there is a sense of balance between them. A kind of quiet agreement in their placement. Along one side of the chamber, a narrow shelf carved into the stone holds a simple arrangement of items. A container at the back. Two smaller objects placed evenly in front. And a single piece slightly offset, as if completing the composition without needing symmetry. The spacing feels calm and deliberate, though not formal. It gives the impression of something arranged slowly, with attention, rather than planned in strict order. In the center of the room, the floor shows faint variations in tone. These marks are not damage. They are impressions left behind by long periods of still placement. Soft outlines where objects once remained undisturbed for extended time. They are almost invisible at first glance, and yet they subtly define the space in a way that is only noticed after careful observation. In a corner slightly set back from the main chamber, a small grouping of objects rests together. A container placed toward the rear. Two items positioned in front of it. And one object set slightly apart, not isolated, but gently separated within the group. The arrangement feels quiet and balanced, even though it does not follow strict symmetry. It carries a sense of intention that is felt more than understood. Along the wall nearby, faint markings appear only when light moves across them at a precise angle. They are barely there. Thin lines. Soft impressions. Remnants of something once more visible, now reduced to suggestion. They do not form complete scenes anymore. But they still carry a trace of meaning. A hint of gesture. A suggestion of form. As the archaeologists continue their slow and careful movement through this space, there is a growing sense that the chamber does not respond to haste. It does not resist movement, but it also does not encourage speed. Everything within it seems to settle toward stillness naturally. Even attention itself becomes softer here. Less focused on discovery in the usual sense, and more attuned to presence. To spacing. To quiet detail. Outside, beyond the layers of earth and stone, the desert continues its slow and endless rhythm. The sun shifts slightly lower in the sky, changing the angle of light across the sand. Shadows lengthen gently, stretching across the dunes in quiet lines. But none of this movement reaches below. Inside the tomb, everything remains in a preserved condition. Unchanged by time as it passes above. Unmoved by the cycles of day and night. It exists in a different kind of continuity. One that does not measure hours or seasons. Only stillness. Only persistence. And within that persistence, every object remains exactly where it was left, holding its place with a quiet certainty that does not fade. Not active. Not distant. Simply present. Existing in a calm and uninterrupted state that continues without need for change. As the exploration moves even deeper, the tomb begins to feel less like a physical structure and more like a long, continuous silence shaped into stone. Each chamber feels connected not only by passageways, but by a shared stillness that becomes more noticeable the further one goes inward. There is no sharp change between spaces. Only a gradual deepening. A slow quiet that settles more firmly with every step. In one of the deeper chambers, the stone surfaces appear more uniform than before. The walls are less marked, less decorated, and more simplified in their appearance. Time seems to have softened any detail that may once have been present, leaving behind only faint traces of form and intention. The light in this space is limited and gentle. It does not fully illuminate anything. Instead, it reveals partial details and allows the rest to remain in shadow. This creates a calm balance between visibility and concealment, as if the room prefers to be understood slowly rather than immediately. On the floor, a few objects rest in a loose arrangement. A shallow vessel placed slightly away from the center. A carved fragment lying nearby. A piece of folded material that has lost much of its original structure but still holds its shape. None of these objects appear forced into position. They simply remain where they were left. And in that remaining, there is a quiet sense of order that does not require explanation. Along one wall, a shallow stone recess contains a simple grouping of items. A container placed at the back. Two smaller objects positioned evenly in front of it. And a single item resting slightly apart, completing the arrangement without symmetry, but still maintaining balance. The spacing between these objects creates a soft rhythm across the surface of the stone. Not decorative. Not symbolic in an obvious way. Just quietly structured presence. In the center of the chamber, the floor carries faint impressions where objects once rested for long periods of time. These are not physical marks in a strong sense. They are subtle differences in tone and texture. Changes so slight they almost disappear unless observed closely. And yet, once noticed, they give the space a deeper sense of history. A sense that something once remained here long enough to leave its memory behind. In a corner slightly removed from the main area, archaeologists find another small arrangement of objects. A container placed toward the rear of the space. Two items arranged in front of it. And one object set slightly apart, not isolated, but gently separated within the group. The pattern is simple, but it feels intentional in a quiet, unspoken way. It does not draw attention. It simply exists in balance with the surrounding stillness. Along the nearby wall, faint markings appear only when light moves across the surface at a certain angle. They are nearly invisible otherwise. Soft lines. Faded impressions. Traces of something once more defined, now reduced to suggestion. They no longer form complete images, but they still hint at movement and form. A gesture preserved in stone. A memory that has softened but not disappeared. As the archaeologists continue their careful observation, there is a growing awareness that the chamber does not encourage rapid interpretation. It does not demand immediate understanding. Instead, it seems to support slow attention. A way of seeing that allows details to reveal themselves over time. Outside, beyond the buried chambers, the desert continues its steady transformation under the shifting light of day. Sand moves gently with the wind, reshaping patterns that will not remain for long. Shadows lengthen across the landscape, stretching and softening as the sun lowers. But none of this motion reaches below. Here, within the tomb, everything remains preserved in its quiet state. Not affected by change above. Not altered by passing time. Only held. Only sustained. And within that sustained stillness, every object, every surface, and every faint trace of human presence continues exactly as it was left. Not active. Not gone. Simply present in a quiet continuity that does not ask to end, and does not ask to begin again. At this point in the tomb, the sense of exploration becomes almost secondary. What remains most noticeable is not what is being discovered, but how everything seems to exist in a quiet agreement with time itself. Each chamber continues the same slow language of stone and stillness, with only subtle differences separating one space from another. The passageways feel shorter now, yet somehow deeper in feeling. As if distance is no longer measured by length, but by the density of silence that fills each step forward. In one chamber, the walls are smooth and minimally marked. There is very little decoration left here. Only faint traces suggest that something may once have been present, lines that are now softened almost beyond recognition. The stone surface appears natural and calm, shaped as much by time as by human hands. Light enters in a soft and limited way, revealing only portions of the room at any given moment. Everything else remains gently hidden in shadow. On the floor, a few objects rest in a quiet, unstructured arrangement. A shallow bowl placed slightly off-center. A small carved piece positioned nearby. A fragment of material, folded and softened, lying closer to the wall. None of these objects appear to compete for attention. Instead, they coexist in a calm spacing that feels naturally balanced. Along one side of the chamber, a recessed shelf carved into the stone holds a simple grouping of items. A container placed toward the back. Two smaller objects positioned evenly in front. And a single item resting slightly apart, completing the arrangement without symmetry, yet still maintaining harmony. The spacing between objects creates a soft visual rhythm across the stone surface. Not deliberate in a decorative sense, but steady, like a quiet pattern repeated without urgency. In the center of the chamber, faint impressions remain in the floor where objects once rested for long periods. These marks are not strong or clearly defined. They are subtle changes in tone and texture, shaped gradually over time. They suggest presence without needing physical form. A memory held in stone through absence rather than display. In a corner slightly removed from the main chamber, archaeologists observe another small grouping of objects. A container positioned at the rear. Two items placed in front of it. And one object set slightly apart within the group. The arrangement feels calm and intentional, though not structured in a rigid way. It gives the impression of quiet balance rather than formal design. Nearby, faint markings on the wall become visible only when light passes across them at a certain angle. They are almost invisible otherwise. Soft lines. Faded impressions. Hints of imagery that once may have been clearer, now reduced to suggestion. They do not form complete scenes anymore. But they still carry a sense of motion. A sense that something once existed here in a more defined form. As archaeologists continue their careful observation, the atmosphere of the chamber seems to influence their pace naturally. There is no rush. No pressure to move quickly or interpret immediately. Instead, there is a steady encouragement toward patience. Toward allowing details to emerge slowly, in their own time. Outside, the desert continues its long and quiet rhythm. Wind moves gently across the surface of the sand, reshaping it in patterns that will not remain. Light shifts across the horizon, marking the passage of time in soft gradients rather than sharp transitions. But none of this movement reaches below the surface. Inside the tomb, everything remains in its preserved condition. Unaffected by change above. Unchanged by passing hours. Held in a stillness that does not break or fade. And within that stillness, every object, every surface, and every faint trace of human presence continues exactly as it was left. Not active. Not absent. Simply enduring. In a quiet continuity that stretches without urgency, and rests without end. As the exploration continues, the tomb feels less like a place being entered and more like a place being gradually understood in layers. Each chamber does not reveal itself all at once. Instead, it offers small details over time, as if it prefers patience over discovery. The stillness here feels slightly deeper than before. Not heavier. Just more settled. More complete in its quiet presence. In one chamber, the stone walls appear almost plain at first glance. Only after remaining still for a while do faint details begin to emerge. Soft variations in the surface. Barely visible traces of lines that may once have formed images or symbols. Now they exist only as impressions, shaped by time and softened by silence. The lighting in this space is gentle and uneven. It does not fully illuminate the room. Instead, it moves across surfaces in soft gradients, revealing and concealing details in a slow rhythm. On the floor, a few objects are placed with quiet spacing. A shallow vessel rests slightly toward one side. A carved fragment lies nearby. A folded piece of material sits closer to the wall, its edges softened and indistinct. Each object feels separate, yet not isolated. There is a subtle connection between them, formed through their shared stillness rather than physical arrangement. Along one wall, a recessed ledge contains a simple grouping of items. A container placed at the back. Two smaller objects positioned evenly in front. And a single item set slightly apart, completing the balance without symmetry. The spacing is calm and natural, as if it formed itself slowly over time rather than being arranged all at once. In the center of the chamber, faint impressions on the floor suggest where objects once remained for long periods. These are not sharp markings. They are soft changes in tone and texture, almost like shadows left behind by presence. They do not show what was there. But they suggest that something was. And that suggestion becomes part of the room itself. In a corner slightly removed from the main space, archaeologists find another small arrangement. A container placed toward the rear. Two items positioned in front of it. And one object resting slightly apart within the group. The arrangement feels balanced in a quiet, unspoken way. Not strict. Not formal. Just steady. Nearby, faint markings appear on the wall only when the light reaches them at a precise angle. They are nearly invisible otherwise. Soft lines. Faded impressions. Traces of imagery that once may have been clearer, now reduced to suggestion. They no longer form complete scenes. But they still hint at motion and presence. A gesture. A shape. A memory softened into the stone. As the archaeologists continue their careful movement through the chamber, the atmosphere encourages a slower rhythm. There is no urgency in this space. No demand for immediate interpretation. Only a quiet invitation to observe, and to remain present long enough for details to gently reveal themselves. Outside, the desert continues its endless and gradual transformation. Sand shifts under the influence of wind, forming and dissolving patterns that will not last. Light changes across the horizon in soft stages, marking time without suddenness. But none of that movement reaches below. Beneath the surface, everything remains preserved in its quiet condition. Unaffected by change above. Unmoved by passing time. Held in a steady continuity that does not break or diminish. And within that continuity, every object, every surface, and every faint trace of human presence remains exactly where it was left. Not active. Not absent. Simply enduring in a silence that continues without effort, and without end. As the descent continues into the deeper sections of the tomb, the sense of distance from the world above becomes less about geography and more about atmosphere. It is as if each chamber adds another layer of quiet, each one softening the presence of sound, light, and even thought itself. The passageways feel familiar now in their repetition. Narrow, then open. Open, then narrow again. Always guiding forward without urgency. There is no feeling of arrival, only continuation. In one chamber, the stone surfaces appear particularly uniform. The walls are smooth in long stretches, with only occasional variations in texture. It is a simplicity that feels intentional, though it is difficult to say whether it was created that way or shaped by time. Light moves across the room in a slow, limited way. It does not fill the space. It only touches parts of it, leaving the rest in gentle shadow. On the floor, a few objects are placed in a quiet, unstructured formation. A shallow bowl sits slightly away from the center. A small carved item rests nearby. A folded fragment of material lies closer to the edge of the wall. There is space between each object, not large, but enough to create a sense of breathing room within the arrangement. Nothing touches. Nothing overlaps. Everything remains in its own small area of stillness. Along one side of the chamber, a recessed shelf carved into the stone holds a simple grouping of items. A container positioned toward the back. Two smaller objects placed evenly in front of it. And a single object set slightly apart, completing the balance without strict symmetry. The arrangement feels calm, almost natural, as if it developed gradually rather than being placed in a single moment. In the center of the chamber, faint impressions on the floor suggest where objects once rested for extended periods. These marks are not clearly defined. They are subtle variations in tone and texture, shaped slowly over time. They do not show detail. They only suggest presence. A quiet reminder that something once occupied this space long enough to leave a trace behind. In a corner slightly removed from the main area, archaeologists notice another small grouping of objects. A container placed at the rear. Two items positioned in front. And one object resting slightly apart within the group. The arrangement is simple, but it carries a sense of balance that is felt rather than analyzed. It does not stand out. It simply exists within the quiet structure of the room. Nearby, faint markings appear on the wall only when light reaches them at a certain angle. They are nearly invisible at first glance. Soft lines. Faded impressions. Remnants of something that once may have been clearer, now reduced to subtle suggestion. They no longer form complete images, but they still hint at form and movement. A gesture that once had meaning. A shape that once carried definition. Now softened into the stone itself. As the archaeologists continue their slow observation, there is a noticeable deepening of stillness in the atmosphere. It does not feel imposed. It feels natural. As if the chamber itself encourages quiet attention. There is no pressure to interpret everything at once. Only a gentle unfolding of detail, as time allows. Outside, far beyond the buried chambers, the desert continues its endless and patient transformation. Sand shifts with the wind in patterns that last only briefly. Light changes across the horizon in slow gradients that mark the passing of hours. But none of this reaches below. Here, beneath layers of earth and stone, everything remains in a preserved state. Unaffected. Uninterrupted. Unchanged. And within that unchanged space, every object, every surface, and every faint trace of human presence continues exactly as it was left. Not active. Not forgotten. Simply enduring in a silence that does not break, and does not ask to end. At this depth of the tomb, the sense of discovery becomes quieter than before. It is no longer shaped by surprise, but by continuity. Each chamber feels like a continuation of the same slow breath that has been present since the beginning of the descent. The stone here carries a softened appearance. Not worn in a damaged way, but gently reduced by time, as if every sharpness has been slowly eased away over centuries. There is a calm uniformity to the surfaces. Walls, floors, and ledges all seem to share the same muted tone, blending into a single quiet atmosphere. Light enters only in limited ways. It does not spread widely. It rests in narrow areas, leaving much of the chamber in gentle shadow. On the floor, a few objects remain in a loose and quiet arrangement. A shallow vessel sits slightly off to one side. A small carved fragment rests nearby. A piece of folded material lies closer to the wall, softened by time into an almost formless shape. The spacing between these objects is subtle, but noticeable. Each one occupies its own small area of stillness, as if given space not for function, but for presence. Along one side of the chamber, a carved recess holds a simple grouping of items. A container placed toward the back. Two smaller objects positioned evenly in front. And one item resting slightly apart, completing the arrangement in a way that does not rely on symmetry, but still feels balanced. The pattern is gentle, almost unintentional in appearance, yet consistently present throughout the deeper sections of the tomb. In the center of the chamber, the floor shows faint impressions where objects once remained for long periods. These are not clear marks. They are soft variations in texture and tone, created slowly over time through continued stillness. They do not show what was there. Only that something was there. And that absence has left its own quiet imprint. In a corner slightly set back from the main chamber, archaeologists observe another grouping of objects. A container placed toward the rear. Two items arranged in front of it. And one object slightly separated within the group. The arrangement is minimal, but it carries a sense of order that is felt rather than defined. It does not draw attention to itself. It simply belongs to the space in which it rests. Nearby, faint markings on the wall become visible only when light moves across them at a precise angle. They are nearly invisible otherwise. Soft lines. Faded impressions. Traces of something once more defined, now reduced to suggestion. They no longer form complete scenes, but they still hint at movement and presence. A gesture held in stone. A memory softened by time. As the archaeologists continue their careful observation, the chamber seems to guide their pace without words or instructions. There is no urgency here. No expectation of quick interpretation. Only a steady encouragement toward patience and attention. A way of seeing that unfolds slowly, rather than all at once. Outside, beyond the layers of earth and stone, the desert continues its quiet and endless rhythm. Wind moves across the sand, shaping and reshaping the surface in patterns that are temporary and ever-changing. Light shifts across the horizon in gradual stages, marking time in soft transitions. But none of that motion reaches below. Within the tomb, everything remains preserved in its quiet condition. Unchanged by the world above. Unaffected by the passing of time. Held in a steady continuity that does not break or fade. And within that continuity, every object, every surface, and every faint trace of human presence remains exactly as it was left. Not active. Not absent. Simply enduring in a silence that continues without interruption, and rests without end. As the tomb extends further into its deepest layers, the sense of movement becomes almost entirely internal. It is no longer the body that feels like it is traveling through space, but the awareness itself slowly adjusting to each new chamber. The structure remains consistent. Stone passageways leading into stone chambers. Narrow transitions opening into slightly wider spaces. Each section connected, yet distinct in its quiet atmosphere. The deeper rooms carry a stillness that feels more settled than the ones above. Not heavier. Just more complete. In one chamber, the walls are largely unadorned. Any decoration that may have once existed has softened into near invisibility. What remains are faint tonal shifts in the stone, like echoes of earlier intention. The surface feels smooth in some areas, more textured in others. These variations are subtle, noticed only after extended observation. Light enters gently, without filling the space entirely. It touches only parts of the chamber at a time, allowing the rest to remain in soft shadow. On the floor, a few objects are arranged with quiet spacing. A shallow bowl rests slightly away from the center. A carved fragment lies nearby, its edges softened by time. A folded piece of material sits closer to the wall, barely distinguishable from the surrounding dust and stone. Each object remains separate, yet they feel connected through their shared stillness. There is no sense of disorder. Only a quiet distribution across space. Along one wall, a recessed shelf holds a minimal arrangement of items. A container placed toward the back. Two smaller objects positioned evenly in front. And a single item slightly offset, completing the balance without symmetry. The arrangement is simple, but it carries a calm consistency that appears throughout these deeper chambers. It does not feel designed for display. It feels like placement guided by habit, care, or quiet intention. In the center of the chamber, faint impressions remain on the floor. These are not defined marks. They are subtle changes in tone and texture, formed over long periods of still presence. They suggest where objects once remained undisturbed for extended time. They do not show what those objects were. Only that they were there. And that their absence has become part of the surface itself. In a corner slightly removed from the main area, archaeologists observe another small grouping. A container placed at the rear. Two items arranged in front of it. And one object resting slightly apart within the group. The spacing is delicate and balanced, though not rigidly structured. It feels natural, as if it was never arranged all at once, but formed slowly over time. Nearby, faint wall markings appear only when light moves across them at a precise angle. They are nearly invisible otherwise. Soft lines. Faded impressions. Traces of imagery that once may have been clearer, now reduced to suggestion. They no longer form complete scenes, but they still hold a sense of gesture and presence. Something once intended to be seen. Now softened into the stone itself. As archaeologists continue their careful observation, the chamber seems to influence their pace even more strongly than before. Movements slow naturally. Attention lingers longer. Silence feels more structured here, as if it has settled into layers rather than a single continuous state. Outside, the desert continues its quiet and endless transformation. Wind reshapes the surface of sand in patterns that are constantly erased and renewed. Light shifts across the horizon in gradual, almost unnoticeable changes. But none of that motion reaches below. Here, beneath layers of earth and stone, everything remains in its preserved condition. Unchanged. Uninterrupted. Held in a stillness that does not weaken with time. And within that stillness, every object, every surface, and every faint trace of human presence continues exactly as it was left. Not active. Not gone. Simply enduring in a quiet continuity that remains steady, without beginning and without end. In the deepest quiet of the tomb, there is no sense that anything is waiting to be concluded. Only that everything has already been continuing for a very long time. The final chambers do not feel final at all. They feel like continuation without direction, like a place where the idea of next has slowly dissolved. The stone is still. The air is still. Even the smallest details seem to rest in a kind of agreement with the silence around them. There are no large discoveries waiting at the end. No sudden revelation. Only presence, distributed gently across space. A few objects remain where they were left. A vessel, softened by age. A carved fragment, no longer sharp in detail. A piece of material that once belonged to daily life, now resting without movement for centuries. Each one is simple. Each one quiet. And together, they form a soft reminder of lives that once moved through the world above. Not loudly. Not urgently. But in steady, ordinary rhythms. In this final stillness, the tomb does not feel like it is ending. It feels like it has always been here in this state, and always will remain so. Time outside continues, of course. The desert shifts. The wind moves. The sun rises and falls in its slow cycle. But none of that reaches this place in any meaningful way. Here, everything remains held. Not preserved as something frozen, but sustained as something unchanged in its quiet existence. And as the archaeologists stand in the final chamber, there is nothing left to uncover in the way one might expect. Only the awareness that discovery, in this place, was never about reaching an ending. It was about slowly learning how stillness can hold memory without speaking. How silence can carry history without needing to explain it. And how time, when it is gentle enough, does not erase what was once lived. It only softens it, until it becomes part of the stone itself. The work does not close with a conclusion that feels final. It simply settles. Like dust returning to rest. Like light fading slowly from a quiet room. And the tomb remains, as it has always been, quiet, patient, and unchanged, holding its long memory in silence, without asking for anything in return. And then, nothing more is needed. Only stillness.